I'm just driving and a few miles away from the office, so
Okay.
I think I'll keep myself off video while I drive.
That would be smart.
Yeah. Sure.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, definitely.
I see Selena's joining. Should we go ahead and get started, and Gail will join when she's able? Okay.
Yeah, we're ready to stream, so go ahead and get started. I'm sure she'll be on soon. I haven't seen any messages from her saying she's having any problems, so I think she's just a little behind.
I'll text her.
Okay.
Sounds
Perfect.
good.
All right, well, we're ready. Go ahead and go.
All right. We just need the recording on. All right. Well, welcome everyone to day 2 of the May 2021 CWCB board meeting. It's good to see everyone again. We are on agenda item 25, the Basin Director's Report. And we'll kick things off with Director Felt in the Arkansas.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to have Vivian run this for me. I want to talk today about the Upper Arkansas Voluntary Flow Management Program, and my reasons are at least twofold. For one, over the last year, some of the conversations I've had with my fellow directors has kind of made it clear to me that we really do operate in different basins, and some of the things that we can sort of consider to be just fundamental to our landscape that we operate in isn't necessarily fundamental somewhere else. And that it took me several meetings to get through the Jim Yon return flow thing, because it didn't seem that funny to me, because we talk about that all the time too. But anyway, it helped me see that there really are differences. And this voluntary flow program, I think, informs my view of things, and it probably informs some of the issues that I raise or ways I look at things. It's also what brought me into this whole water conversation originally about, I don't know, 23 years ago or something like that, and led me down this path to where I am now. So this PowerPoint was created by Chris Woodka, who is the Senior Policy and Issues Director for the Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District. He and I kind of put this together for a presentation a while back, but he put it together in terms of the PowerPoint. It took me about 20 minutes just to change the date on this thing. So if some of the stuff seems a little dated or something, that's just because I didn't have time to make this my own. So with that, I'm just going to launch into it. And if I skip over some things, it's because it's kind of long and I just want to get to the core stuff. So Vivian, let's go to the next one. So the Voluntary Flow Management Program is a program that's designed to basically augment river flows during July and first half of August to kind of sustain the rafting season, if necessary, on the Arkansas River, which of course is the most popular rafting river in Colorado and arguably the world. And then it also seeks to achieve some real benefits for the fishery at other times of year. And along with that, the Bureau of Reclamation, which administers the program, and the Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District, which owns the water rights involved in the program, they also seek to try and do this in a measured way and not have dramatic flow changes, when we're making adjustments. You got Southeastern involved, Chaffee County, Parks and Wildlife, the Arkansas River Outfitters Association, and Trout Unlimited are the 5 signatories to the agreement. And the agreement lasts 5 years at a time. We just renewed it recently. We can go to the next slide, Vivian. It's an interesting program. It's, the voluntary flow program. It's not a water right like an RICD type of situation, but in many ways it's a lot more effective, I think, than an RICD, which is I think of as kind of a defensive water right. that protects against exchanges. This actually brings water into the river out of storage or stored water at certain times to accomplish our goals. It's protected, though, even though it's not a water right, there's quite a bit of legal structure around it. And so I often use the analogy of the definition of a room. What is a room? Is a room the space, or is it the walls, floor, and ceiling that create the space? And, kind of depends how you look at it. In this case, what we have is something that's sort of like a water right, but it is really because there's water rights built all around it and water management policies built all around it, so that everyone's so invested in this thing that it's voluntary for sure, and it's subject to availability of water, but it is a very, everyone's invested in it. A couple things that support it, the Salida RICD, which was back in 2004, kind of codified how this thing would be administered in terms of 5-year agreements and a 5-party group that worked on that. In addition, Southeastern has come up with kind of boilerplate language now that that they insist on in any stipulation that they're involved with in terms of if you're going to get them to agree on any kind of a water court case, you have to stipulate that you will respect the flow program and not exchange against flow program releases. And then reclamation also in their storage contracts now requires support or respect for the voluntary flow management program. And the biggest thing in that regard is that when water's being released to augment flows, that you can't exchange against those releases. That is really the core thing. We can go to the next slide, Vivian. A little more background. We've got some minimum flows on the Arkansas. They are not senior to most water rights, but they do create sort of minimum flows for our wastewater treatment plants in Salida and Canyon City. They're minimal, but they're sort of a floor, and probably more important just as a concept than an actual enforceable right. But it sets the floor for us. We also, back in the Aurora Rocky Ford exchange case, we were able to, I worked with David Harrison, some of you may know him, great water attorney who's from Salida originally, worked with him to get an interpretation from the U.S. Attorney's Office to kind of reinterpret what recreation values were intended or could be interpreted from the FRIARC project authorizing legislation. It includes environment and recreation in that legislation. And initially it was, I think, viewed as flat water recreation on the reservoirs. And we got a reinterpretation that said, hey, the Arkansas River isn't just a pipeline between Turquoise or Twin and Pueblo. It's truly a recreational asset in its own right. And that providing for recreation on the river would be in keeping with the FRIARC legislation. And then in addition, in this case, this was kind of a threshold moment, but we were able to require that Aurora, in addition to looking at exchange potential from native inflows to storage reservoirs, we also indexed their ability to exchange to the flow in the river, so that as the river flow got higher, the exchange indexing went higher. And it was very measured, so that even if there was good exchange potential, they couldn't severely dewater the river and limit the experience. And they ended up agreeing to this. When we had the Pueblo West Hill Ranch exchange case, of course, everybody, and especially Aurora, said, hey, you did it to Aurora, you got to do it to Pueblo West too. And so we have this exchange indexing concept has become a part of the landscape here. And then again, we had the RICD in 2004 that just helped formalize this whole program. Okay, Vivian. Another important thing another important element that's led to acceptance of this is this clause in the agreement, which basically says that if any of the parties to the agreement seek to get like a federal wild and scenic status, recreational river, or federal reserve water rights on the Arkansas, that could void the program. So there's definitely kind of a balance that's been struck there. And I think it's a really good one, because this comes up every so often. And let's go for wild and scenic status. And then the answer is always like, why would you do that? We have it better with our own voluntary flow program than we would ever get out of some kind of federal right. So that's a part of the landscape as well. Vivian, next slide. Just for those who are maybe a little unclear on the landscape here, just the real big picture map. Over towards the left, where in the red, where it says Hunter Tunnel, Chapman Tunnel, South Fork Tunnel, all that, that's the collection system in the frying pan drainage for the Fry Arc project, which historically imports about 58,000 acre feet of water a year into the Arkansas River Basin. It comes through the Boosted Tunnel into Turquoise Lake, and then, which was enlarged for the Fry Arc project, as was Twin Lakes. We also built a conduit that goes from Turquoise down to something called Mount Elbert Forebay, which is an elevated off-channel reservoir, and then drops through a conduit to the Mount Elbert power plant in Twin Lakes. And when there's plenty of water running through that conduit, that runs the power plant. When there isn't, we do pump back storage up to Forebay. So you pump at times of low energy use, and then you generate electricity when more is needed. It's important, and then the water is released from Twin Lakes in the Arkansas River. They hardly ever release much out of Turquoise directly to the river. This is fully consumable Trans Mountain water, and what's important to understand is that, you know, it's not part of the Arkansas River historic native flows and prior appropriation system. This is water from outside of that, and so it makes it really valuable because it's so flexible. We can kind of move it around and use it as we need to. And then releases from Twin Lakes for the voluntary flow management program are recaptured down at Pueblo Reservoir. So we're able to use the water as a non-consumptive beneficial use and then recapture it because most of the deliveries take place below Pueblo Reservoir anyway. What are the consequences of moving this water? Next slide, Vivian. There are some things that, some impacts here that are important to understand. So the water that's stored up at Twin Lakes evaporates about almost 15 inches a year, where water stored in Pueblo, evaporates about 50% more. So moving water prematurely from Twin down to Pueblo has a cost associated with it. Okay. There's also the transit loss moving from Twin to Pueblo, which often would be incurred anyway, but the evaporative loss is a serious thing. And so the Parks and Wildlife actually makes up that difference in actual wet water. It's often a challenge. Often water from John Martin's exchanged up to Pueblo to cover those actual wet water losses. And outfitters pay for that through a use fee on our gross trip fees. The other thing to understand about moving water and bringing extra water into the basin is that we have a wild brown trout fishery. They do not do well with high current velocity. And so the optimal flows for brown trout are 250 to 400 CFS, where sort of the minimum good flows for rafting are about 700 CFS. Let's go to the next slide, Vivian. Just really quickly through this part, we had in the 80s, as rafting was really getting going, there was a lot of conflict, I think, between fishermen and boating interests over optimal flows and, access generally, and just that sort of part of our landscape and our history. Next slide. And then we'd also had some conflict between sort of the historic landowners along the river, a lot of whom were in agriculture, and this growing rafting scene in the early 80s, and people learning about private land and water rights and all that kind of stuff. Next slide. And so in that context, I always think of this as the positive expression of the sagebrush revolution in the late 80s is we went to the legislature and said we wanted more local control in the Arkansas River Basin. But most of the public lands along the river are BLM. And the BLM was really incapable of managing the surge in recreation. And so we got state parks. The legislature approved state parks, creating a kind of a joint management area with the BLM, and created the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area. And that gave us kind of more of a situation where we can work together to manage flows for recreation. Next slide. So back in 1990, and we were coming off the late 80s where we had some really low water years, there was a desire to see if we could do something to manage flows on the Arkansas River and to improve on that. Next slide. And so at that time, Reed Dills, who served on the CWCB prior to me, obviously, he kind of led a group of outfitters down to Southeastern and say, hey, is there any way you could release water for recreation and kind of coordinate this a bit better? It was quite controversial, and there was some real resistance put forward, but in the end, they decided to do it administratively, within the administration of Southeastern, and they just started dumping a whole bunch of water, about 23,000 acre feet in a pretty short period of time. The river went way up. I remember the day, and it was really exciting, but it created a lot of controversy. And Trout Unlimited, next slide, please. Trout Unlimited ended up filing for an injunction in federal court to stop the releases, and big controversy, a lot of tension. But what ended up coming from that is that in 1992, we really all started working together to figure this out. Next slide. And came up with the plan that, whoops, one more slide forward, sorry, that would support the rafting industry and our tourism, but would also take care of the fishery. Next slide. And so what we came up with was let's try to create a pool of 10,000 acre feet that's available for this program when we have it. And then let's set a base flow of 700 CFS as measured at Wellsville, just below Salida, from July 1st to August 15th. That's typically, good summer season, but often the flows drop below there. And this graph kind of shows how much water was released over the years to accomplish that up through 2016. And it continues to keep going. Water supply obviously is important. Available storage at both ends is important, and the timing of runoff all impact this. Next slide. In dry years, this has been really important, and for a long time there was a lot of concern that we just release 700 CFS, and when we run out, because no one ever wanted to admit that we could run on 600 CFS, because we thought, well, we might get dialed back. In 2012, 2013, we kind of stepped forward and said, you know what, we can actually do okay with less, and it would be better to go to August 15th on 500, or let's say, than to go to August 1st on 700. And since then, we've really worked as this committee to look at each year. We have a series of phone calls through the whole winter, spring, and summer, figuring out what we're going to do to manage these flows to best effect. Next slide. Even in wet years, in our dry environment, we talked about the monsoons yesterday. If we don't get the monsoon rains, we often, even in a good snowpack year, that runoff will run its course, and we can end up down at 700 or below. And so we've actually had years that have dropped below that you wouldn't have expected, but because this water goes pretty quick. Next slide. The other part of the program was improving the fishery. And so what we kind of realized is that in the fall, the river just is what it is. There's really nothing you can do about it to modify the flows much. Next slide. In the winter, the fish are pretty well hunkered down in winter water, deep, slow pools, and it really doesn't matter how much the flow is. It doesn't affect them very much. You can just put more and more water over them. Whereas in the spring, the brown trout fry are emerging from their fall spawn and winter incubation. It's really important that we have low flows to establish those brown trout fry before high water. And we also have tremendous insect hatches in the spring. We just lived through that, which really feed the fish and strengthen them up for runoff. So it helps sustain them through the years. And so what was historically the pattern was they would wait through the winter and watch the snowpack. And then if they needed to make more space upstream for the imports, they would dump a bunch of water in the springtime down to Pueblo to make room for more imports to store in turquoise. And that was just really screwing up this spring dynamic on the fishery. So starting in 2009, we've worked really closely with the Bureau and Southeastern to develop an interval of confidence, you could say, in moving water during the winter rather than the spring, with the idea to dial those flows down in the spring, April and May in particular, to between 250 and 400 CFS. And in a year like this, where Colorado Springs has been doing a bunch of exchanging upstream to turquoise, that helps us achieve that. And so it's always a tension. When you get a lot of late snow, they got to make more room, and it can kind of mess us up. It's all voluntary, but again, they've been incredible to work with in terms of taking some risk in the winter, with the risk being moving too much water and subjecting it to that higher evaporative rate. But what we end up with is a great spring fishery season economically and a healthier fishery as a result. So next slide. So that's the voluntary flow program in 16 minutes, I think. That was a lot, I realize, and usually we would spend 30, 45 minutes on this, but I just wanted to sort of get that out there a little bit. If anyone has questions, I'm glad to talk about it, or if you want to follow up with me individually, if you have questions, that's totally fine. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Felt, for that fascinating presentation. Are there any questions? All right, well, thank you again. I really enjoyed learning about what's going on in your basin and how you manage the flows.
Next time the group comes to our part of the state, you'll get to experience some aspect of the flow program.
All right, I hope we can make note of that as we plan our schedule. Thank you. All right, moving on to 25B, my report from Denver. Thanks, Vivian. If we could go to the next slide, please. So first, I just want to note, we are getting ready to transition to our new normal. Since we met in March, Denver Water was very fortunate. We were able to vaccinate all of our employees who wanted the COVID vaccine. And we are gearing up to bring employees back to the office on a voluntary basis starting in June, with mandatory return anticipated in September on a hybrid basis. So looking forward to seeing everyone again and returning to a new sense of normal. And I just want to give a shout out to all of the essential water utility workers, not just at Denver Water, but around the state, who have kept water flowing, who have made sure that that they were supplying their customers despite really challenging conditions over the last year and a half. It has not been easy for our crews who operate in treatment plants, who operate in source of supply, who make sure that main breaks get fixed right away. It's been a really challenging year, and all of those essential workers have done just a remarkable job. And so just want to recognize their efforts through some really challenging times. Next slide, please. I thought I'd just give a quick update on our water supply outlook for this year. As we discussed a bit yesterday, the South Platte watershed is looking good. In Denver Water's collection areas, we are at about 96% of average cumulative precipitation. This was as of Monday, so didn't count the rain we've seen over the last few days. And we were at 97% of average peak snowpack. In our Colorado River watershed collection area, so this is above Denver's collection structures, we were at 83% of average cumulative precipitation, 91% of average peak snowpack. We have been actively engaged with CWCB and also regional water providers to determine what, if any, drought restrictions to put in place for this year. And so far, based on the conditions we've seen, Denver will not be imposing drought restrictions this year. We will continue to monitor that, obviously, and can always make a decision to impose those restrictions if needed. But I do just want to note that in Denver, our normal baseline already includes watering restrictions, time of day, number of days per week. So we already have that as a baseline in our normal operating conditions. For a lot of water utilities, those would only get triggered if they impose some type of drought watch or drought restriction. So we encourage that type of conservation every day. Next slide, please. I know I like to feature a lot of fun and quirky water quality topics, and I thought I would highlight a really innovative and exciting program through the city and county of Denver. So several years ago, when they started to envision the redesign of the National Western Center, one of the things that they realized in talking with Metro Wastewater is that there's a huge sewer pipe that runs right along the National Western Center campus. This is the Delghini sewer pipe. It is one of the main feeds that collects all of the wastewater east of the river, east of the South Platte River, and delivers all that sewage to Metro's plant. Metro has a challenge in managing temperature. So it collects all this sewage, it treats it through its treatment system, but some of that heat dissipates through the treatment process. But nonetheless, there are still issues, particularly in the wintertime, that treated water is coming out much hotter from the treatment plant than the normal stream temperature. And so for a long time, Metro's been trying to figure out how can it dissipate some of that heat to protect the aquatic health. And Metro Wastewater and the City and County of Denver got together and said, Metro has excess heat that it wants to get rid of. Is there a way that the city at the National Western campus could put that heat to some type of beneficial use? And this is a project I worked on when I was at the city attorney's office. And what we came up with was essentially a district energy model where Metro would provide that heat free of charge to the city. It would be collected through essentially a mini plant to exchange the heat on the campus, and then through a clean water loop system, that heat could get distributed to pretty much all of the buildings on the National Western Center campus. So it basically solves two problems. Number one, it takes some of that heat out of the sewage and helps Metro manage the heat of its discharges. And number two, it avoids having to use natural gas or other types of energy to heat those buildings. So in total, the city projects that will save about 2,600 metric tons of carbon emissions that would otherwise be generated through other forms of heat, which is about the equivalent of 6.4 million passenger mile vehicles. So it helps with our climate goals. And like I said, it also helps with water quality. There was a really great story on Colorado Public Radio talking about, the ins and outs of this project, but it's really exciting to see it get off the ground. Another benefit of that program is that this huge pipe, which you can see is above ground right now, will be buried. It will be undergrounded by Metro as part of the redesign in order to accomplish the project and provide that heat to the campus. So that will also have an added benefit of opening up river access once that pipe is no longer a physical barrier between the National Western Center campus and the river. So it will create opportunities for visitors to the campus to engage with the river, engage with the waterfront, and learn about water quality and learn about an innovative solution to reducing our climate, our CO2 emissions. Also, just want to mention the Metro Roundtable has been really busy over the last few months. We've gotten some really good grant applications in that the Roundtable is going to be considering, and looking forward to bringing those to the board later on. We continue to work actively on the basin implementation plans. And frankly, I think one of the unintended positives of the COVID pandemic is that having the virtual meetings has in some ways made the meetings more accessible and easier for people who would otherwise have to travel. It makes it easier for people to attend and participate. So it's good to see that level of engagement continue in the Metro Roundtable. And I think that is it. Any questions? Well, Well, thank you all for your time. Let's move on to 25C, Rio Grande. Director Dutton.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm calling in for the second day from my brother's motorhome in Grand Junction, Colorado. This is, I would say, of all of the virtual meetings I've done, this is kind of the funniest place. But as you saw, I hopped off earlier yesterday to join my nephew's graduation, and it was really exciting. It was really neat to see all these kids who've been through so much and had such a, just such a tumultuous year. And it's been hard on, I think, all of us in our work lives and as adults, but then to think about these high school kids having to deal with the pandemic in their last year of school and what that meant for them. It had a rock concert vibe. People showed up with, I felt underprepared. I didn't have an air horn or a cowbell or a confetti gun, and I was in the minority. So anyway, it was really great to see, and it's nice to see that stuff continue and to be able to spend time with my family. To get over here, I drove into Director Felt's neighborhood to see my other brother in Salida, and it was raining. It was raining when I left. It was raining there. I went into Director Anderson's backyard, and it was raining there. And then now I'm in Director Schwartz and Director George's backyard, and it was stormy when I got here too. And so it's nice to see a little bit of weather coming to the state. Now, instead of being a weather person, I'll get into my report. And so, unfortunately, I'm so relieved and happy to see the numbers that Director Brody, that you shared for the Denver Basin. And it's nice to see that there are areas in the state where, there is a good water supply for this year. And I'm truly glad to see that. Unfortunately, that is not the situation that is existing in the Rio Grande Basin this year. Pulling up some notes for myself real fast. The latest streamflow forecast numbers that I've received estimate the flow at the Rio Grande del Norte, which is the compact index gauge, at 370,000 acre feet for the total year, which is 57% of the long-term average. And so that means that we'll have quite a low curtailment because our obligation to New Mexico is quite low, but still today, 7% of our water users are being curtailed. And so that's a pretty tough thing for those guys, that they, already are facing dry soil temperatures, hot and dry weather, and they're not able to divert their surface water. And so this 57% of average flows in the Rio Grande, it's pretty similar to what we saw last year. We actually saw the snowpack and the hydrograph, it stacked up to be very similar to 2020, where we had pretty good snow early on. Although, as you all know, I'm a pretty avid snow surveyor on the weekends, and it just didn't feel like it was there. It's been, even when we had pretty deep snow, it was very dry and very patchy. And so now we're seeing that, I think, as the forecast numbers are being refined and as flows are actually occurring. We also, in the Caneo system, they're doing a little bit better. And so there are 3 gauges that are brought together to total the estimate for the Caneo system. And so the estimated flow for the Caneos index gauges is 215,000 acre feet. And that's 72% of the long-term average. So they're sitting a little better than the northern part of our basin, but still not great. Curtailment's at 10%. And so the one, I guess, a positive in the genesis of these numbers, I can't say that there's much positive about these actual numbers and about the conditions that we're going to have to deal with, but something that's been really neat is just seeing the numbers be refined through the use of better data. And so, as you all are aware, we installed this great radar in the Alamos airport a couple years ago, and that's been really important for the estimates that come from NCAR, which is the National Center for Atmospheric Research. So the radar data feeds into having an understanding of what snow fell where, when. But then we've also been participating in the LIDAR flights that have been coordinated with a lot of help from CWCB and Division Water Resources, and really spearheaded by the Caneos Water Conservancy District and their manager, Nathan Combs. I think Nathan he remains one of our strongest and most humble leaders and movers and shakers in the basin. And so the LiDAR flights are allowing us to have a better understanding of taking that radar data and understanding what snow fell when and where, and then how it's moved. And so where we've lost it, or where it's blown to, and where we're sitting at. And so every time we've had 2 LiDAR flights, we had a snow on and then a snow off one just this week. And those help us understand what's still up there. And it's just really, I think it's really exciting, and it's really fascinating to see how every time we get new data from one of these new tools, we're able to refine the streamflow forecast, which unfortunately the revisions are showing the forecast just continuing to decline. And so we're anticipating another hard year in the basin. And on the ground, it means challenges for farmers and ranchers trying to, make a living and graze cows and grow crops. It also is a challenge for our groundwater management subdistricts, because they exist twofold. And I guess I'll kind of transition into one of the most critical things that's happening in our basin right now has to do with groundwater management subdistrict 5. So to back up a little bit, there are in response to, I'm never take advantage that you guys understand all the nuances of the basin. So I'm going to kind of back it up a little bit for everyone's benefit. As you're all aware, Director Ryan has shared, and I have shared, that the groundwater rules and regulations for Division 3 went into effect on March 15th of this year. And so it was, it's been an incredible lift for everybody who works in the space of trying to provide options for people to comply with the rules and regs. And so people have 4 options. The first one is the one that nobody likes, which is they can turn off the well. So that's not really realistic, but it is one of the options. The other 3 options are they can join in an existing augmentation plan, such as one that the district that I manage, the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District, runs. They can file their own augmentation plan in water court, and many people have chosen to do so. There just were an incredible amount of SWSPs this year for people that were filing temporary plans while they're also trying to move through water court. And then they can join, the third option is to join a groundwater management subdistrict. And so subdistricts are, in essence, groups of wells coming together to comply with the rules and regulations. The purpose of the rules and the purpose really of the subdistricts complying with the rules is twofold. One of them, of course, is to reach sustainable levels of groundwater. And so that is done through reductions in pumping and improvements in introducing water into the system. So either recharging or getting more efficient or reducing consumptive use, anything that we can do to have a net positive increase of water into the aquifers helps us reach sustainable levels. And the second purpose of these subdistricts is to remedy impacts to surface water rights. And so that is done in a variety of ways, and it's done every single day. And so, for example, today, Subdistrict 1, for example, will be, they have negotiated arrangements and contracts with all the different ditches on the Rio Grande who they might injure. And so today, based on who's in priority, they would either exchange wet water. And so if that ditch wants water to make up the injury from the well pumping, they will do a release out of one of the upstream reservoirs to that ditch so that they can have the water that otherwise would have been in the stream if the wells didn't exist. Or they can do a practice which is called forbearance, where they can say, it's not that critical for me, or I've done the analysis and I would rather have money than water. And so usually it's about $65 an acre foot, or it varies throughout the valley, but some of it's a lot lower, and I think there are some higher arrangements. And so instead they'll write a check and say, here's what you would have had 2 more CFS in your ditch. We'll pay you for that today. So the challenge for Subdistrict 5 is that this is generally called the Sawash Creek Subdistrict. They're on the north end of the valley, and there are about 200 wells in the subdistrict, and the matter of replacing injury to surface water rights is incredibly challenging because there are no upstream reservoirs. And so to to satisfy the requirement to mitigate injury, water either needs to be introduced into the system through construction of a new reservoir or a pipeline, or there needs to be forbearance agreements. And so far, the subdistrict has not successfully negotiated any forbearance agreements with the surface water rights owners. And so, as you're aware, this board approved a loan for Subdistrict 5 to build a pipeline to put water into the river. But that's become more challenging too. There's just, local permitting requirements and just the actual effort of building a pipeline. I don't think anybody foresaw, or maybe some saw that things were rocky, but I truly thought it was going to work out. But I guess the important news is that Subdistrict 5 filed a temporary bridge annual replacement plan on March 15th to comply with the rules, to show what they were going to do until May 1st, which is the annual replacement plans are year-long documents that run from May to May. And so they had their temporary one and then kind of their 2020 plan, and both have been denied because there does not exist that opportunity to either put water in the river or to have a contractual arrangement where people say, yeah, we'll take forbearance and we feel that our injury has been mitigated. And so it's a pretty big deal. This is something that I think we've all known as a possibility, but we've been working pretty hard to avoid, which is 200 wells in a pretty, rural and pretty small community in the north end of the valley are shut down. And they have been shut down when the temporary plan was denied, and it was clear they wouldn't be able to pump till May 1st. I think people said, okay, this could be tough. The irrigation season normally starts on April 1st. And so they'd hang tight and hope that they had enough winter moisture to keep the roots of their crops wet and everything. But now here we are towards the end of May, and they still haven't been able to turn on those wells. And so people are getting stressed. People are getting tense, and it's a pretty, I guess if I was someone who wrote a diary, I think I would be writing about how surprising and how unprecedented this feels, and just to be living through this history in water management in our basin. And I have to give kudos to the Division of Water Resources staff, because they're not being inflexible. This in no way reflects, them being a hurdle for these folks. It's just that there, again, has not been that ability to just meet this requirement of rules and regs and the subdistricts. And so that's a pretty important thing that's happening. And unfortunately, I can't report to you that we have some great idea that, don't worry, we're going to solve it next week. But it's something that a lot of people are putting their heads together on and figuring out how can we find a solution that works for both the groundwater users and the surface water owners in that area. So that's a challenge. And then just subdistricts overall, again, with the need to be able to replace water into the aquifers and reduce pumping when we have low supply of surface water, it makes it very challenging for people to not turn to groundwater. And it also makes it very challenging to do recharge. And so I'm worried. I'll say I hate to be anything but optimistic in these reports, but unfortunately, I'm pretty worried that this year is going to be very challenging for a lot of different water users in our basin, and especially for the efforts to reach groundwater sustainability. A little bit of positive news is that our roundtable continues to meet, and I really appreciated the sentiment that Director Brody shared, because I also share it's exciting to see how many people are attending our meetings, and even how many people are sneaking in from the Front Range. Director Sakata, I see you at our meetings, and I really appreciate it. It's nice to have attendance from other areas, and it's inspired me to try to do the same too. I was bummed I was driving, or else I wouldn't was going to try to hit the Gunnison meeting this week, but so it's nice to see people who have a long drive, those folks up in Creed who have to drive for 3 hours round trip just to get to a roundtable meeting. They can just log on. And so it's great to see that, and to see people still joking around and having that sense of community and friendship, but also doing good work together. Our Roundtable Education Committee has been working really hard, and we just released an agriculture video. Maybe is that the get off the stage cane? I just got muted. So we just released a video about agriculture in the basin, and with the hope of really sharing the story and hoping to share with some of our friends throughout the state who might not be as connected to agriculture or realize their connection to agriculture. We're really hoping for them to see, what the realities are and how hard these folks work to be good stewards of land and resources, and also grow tasty potatoes and barley for beer and things. So check that out. I'll drop a link in the chat here in a minute. Did also want to highlight the effort of staff, some of the things that I've been involved in lately that I've just been so pleased. The Rio Grande Water Conservation District, on behalf of subdistricts and Colorado Open Lands and the Rio Grande Headwaters Land Trust and CWCB, came together really under the leadership of Alex Funk to put together an ATM project grant application for the Water Smart program through BOR. And there are people in our basin who are just totally in awe and floored with Alex right now, and his vision and leadership in putting together this project. And really the goal would be to think about ways that we can do some ATMs so that we can create water or acquire water to make up some of those depletions, the surface stream depletions that I was talking about, while also protecting, our agriculture communities and connectivity of wildlife habitat. And so, Alex, thank you so much for your leadership on that. It's something that obviously I know you and I know how hard you work and how visionary you are, but to hear Amber Pacheco with the Rio Grande Water Conservation District telling her board that she had no idea that there were people that, had these kind of ideas and could help them. I think that's what I've been so pleased, is that she said that over and over. I never imagined that people would show up to help us like this. And so sincerely, thank you for being a great reflection of our staff and of CWCB. And I think these are exactly the types of projects that we need to be doing as we try to manage this really limited and challenging resource. So thank you for that. I've also been tuning in on the BIP and the water plan listening sessions. And so great job, Russ, and your staff. It's been really cool to see. I guess I don't want to steal any thunder here, but you'll probably talk about this later this morning, but it's been really neat to see so many people turning out for these listening sessions. And so it's very obvious that there's an incredible amount of interest and energy around the state in the water plan update. And I hope that these will continue to have these topical water supply planning section on those. It's been really neat to see. Thanks again also to Director Greenberg for getting the governor down to see us to talk about agriculture and water last week. That was very exciting, and I hope will be very fruitful. The reports yesterday from Director Gibbs about the funding coming to CWCB and coming to all these programs to benefit rural Colorado and agriculture is just so heartening. And I hope that we can continue this conversation. And then I also did want to just highlight too, after our last board meeting, we had the Rio Grande Basin Symposium on March 20th, and Becky and Dan Gibbs both attended, and Dan was the keynote speaker. And just thank you, Dan, for that. People really appreciated what you had to say. And I thought it was so valuable to really highlight the state's commitment to really all the basins, but especially all the great work that's happening in ours. It was a great talk, and I think really helpful for people to hear. And then I will close out my remarks just by thanking Linda. I cannot believe this is your last meeting, Linda, but I'm plan that this will be far from the last time that we see each other, and hopefully next time we see each other will not be on screen. Something that I think we all have been drawn to Linda with her, incredibly magnetic personality. And I was telling her the other day that I was thinking back about our friendship, and that she's one of the first people from CWCB that I knew, and it was due to her friendship with Mike Gibson, who was my former boss. But just just because she was so nice. I would see Linda at Water Congress and conferences, and she always said hello and would visit with me. And you know, the water community is so welcoming and full of wonderful people, but when you're right out of college and just starting out, it's kind of intimidating. So I really appreciated your friendship, Linda, and continue to. And I appreciate your big heart. I appreciate your commitment to the work that you do, but I just, more than anything, I appreciate your love of animals and wildlife and fish, and how you have made it your life's work to take care of the fish and wildlife of Colorado. And that's an incredible legacy. And I'm so pleased for you. And I look forward to getting that beer and watching cranes when you come visit, and hope that we can continue to visit about our cats when we see each other. So thanks for the time, Director Brody. I'll turn it back to you. And just so appreciative of the staff. And again, you guys are amazing people, and it makes participating in these meetings, even if it's from a motorhome, a delight. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Dutton. Are there any questions? What, Director Felt?
Yeah, Director Dutton, that was a great report. Thanks. It raised a thought in my mind that may be just totally irrelevant, but it did make me wonder with these challenges in Subdistrict 5, if that's not able to be resolved soon, do you think that could have any bearing on how people are viewing the, I think it's called Renewable Water Resources proposal?
Yeah, I think that, you know, your guess is as good as mine right now about exactly what would happen, but that is a concern. My concern is that if we aren't able to come together as a community to sort out a way that we can, you know, have pumping exist alongside surface water use, and do this in a way where we comply with rules and regs, and also, you know, just have that community buy-in, that it creates this tear in the fabric of the community that might allow for, you know, for an outside group to come in and prey on that vulnerability. And so I don't know what the effect will be, but it is a fear that I have that if we aren't able to figure this out, that we end up with a less desirable and less graceful outcome, for sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, and I hope you'll keep us posted on how things are going in your basin. All right, Director Brown was not able to be here with us today, so we will not have an update from the Yampa White. So we will move to item 25E, Colorado River. Director Schwartz.
Well, and thank you, everyone, for, you know, such great reports, and having represented, you know, the Arkansas and the Rio Grande and the Gunnison and the Colorado for a decade. These are just these critical issues that really resonate, certainly with me. Thank you both, Director Dutton and Director Felt, and then Director Brody, to share the innovation around heat capture and really looking at BTUs and thermal energy, and not just kilowatt hours is the direction we need to go, because 40% of our energy consumption is in our built environment, and this is the way we can resolve some of these challenges moving forward on the energy side. Now, on the water side, you're looking at Root Eye Reservoir, which I thought would be a good example of looking at a reservoir is about 60% of capacity right now. You can see there's a nice big ring around it, and some challenges getting the boat ramps. They came out early last year, and getting them back in place for this year as well. But really, by contrast, and it's hot and dry. And I think that this combination of high temps, low flows, low snowpack, no monsoons for a couple of years, and probably not this year. And it's that that melt, and certainly dust on snow does impact that. And then our soil moisture being at virtually its excuse me, lowest levels is very concerning. So it just tees us up for wildfires, and wildfires are either grass fires or they're forest fires. But we are again, we've heard a lot of where I think we're aligning our resources in a very thoughtful way to anticipate forest management, but anticipate the threats of these wildfires. So thinking of that, as I said, we are just seeing the snowpack these the water equivalency in the snowpack just drop like a rock over the last 30 days, and the next 3 months just say more of the same, above normal temps, below normal rainfall. And as we looked at our drought maps yesterday, that it worsens the further west you go in the Colorado Basin, especially looking at those very severe drought conditions on the western edge of the state, and obviously including the Southwest. But these Mesa County and our counties on the western edge are certainly under the highest drought conditions, which means that we're seeing the BLM cutting back on our grazing leases in terms of the number of head of cattle that are eligible to go onto those landscapes. And that's very concerning because we also have as low as 10% of the anticipated production for hay and alfalfa in some of our, again, driest areas. So not good perspective on the future that we are seeing our 3 largest wildfires in our second driest year. So I believe that we have some work to do. We have some work to do as a region, anticipating how we can support communities and agriculture during these droughts, and also CWCB and other leaders in the water community anticipating what are some of the important policy we need to put in place going forward. And looking at the official water shortage declaration in the lower Colorado Basin is a very strong indicator of what stances we need to assume. Glenwood Springs, by contrast, Denver Water has put in place water restrictions, and has much to do with the runoff from the Grizzly Fire. And we saw that we approved some adaptation of their system, which allowed for Roaring Fork Water to come in to their system during these times of the high runoff. And it will remain in summer, these water restrictions all summer. And also the collaboration between the Middle Colorado Watershed and the Colorado River District with a grant program through their partnership. They call it Partnership Project Funding Program, about $50,000 working with the Middle Colorado Watershed Council and Paula Stepp as their director to really test the water quality for agriculture and communities as a result of and collecting the data regarding sediment, nutrients, organic matter, carbon from the burned areas. And this data is being collected by Kent Hurst Williams, who some of you remember the work that he's done on over in the Crested Butte area on the East River, and some of that important work, but also taking now his studies and looking at the watersheds that have been impacted by the fires, the Grizzly, fire and the Williams Fork and the East Troublesome fire and analyzing the nutrient loading. I think that this is very important work to understand the watershed disturbances from fire. And all of us have had fire impact areas, but I think we're starting to maybe understand them a little bit better. And this collaborative effort to work together to gather that. A little more work over here on the wild and scenic when it comes to the Crystal River. And it's sort of interesting that that is coming from a fund of the Colorado, the Roaring Fork Healthy Rivers Fund out of Pickens County, is helping to fund some assessment, more continued assessment, and also there's always a fun, interesting, and you can appreciate this, Greg, with the Colorado headwaters and beavers, and looking at beavers doing some of our storage work at the headwaters, and always about that. Go on, Jerry, and keep it up. But I think that it's just another natural tool to look at that. But when the Colorado River District wrapped up their meeting last month, a lot of focus on certainly storage of the Wolford, the Homestead. They can also focus on the compact, fire recovery, and then their funding and their grant program is I think, an important tool for the district in our region and collaboration to look at how are the ways we can work together, what are the resources we can bring to start to solve and address some of these drought issues. So here we are in the middle of a mega drought, but it's really the ratification, of our landscape, and I think we need to be paying attention to it. We'll have our roundtable coming up next week on Monday. We'll welcome Director Mitchell to that, along with Amy, to talk about drought management. And Paul Boucher will be bringing up more information and grant requests for his evaluating conserved consumptive use on the Upper Colorado. Again, this is a really incredible commitment on his part, his family's part, to put in place a way to test some of these assumptions around crop rotation, et cetera, to identify opportunities for conserved consumptive use. And would recommend anyone who's not heard enough about that to tune in around noon on Monday, 12:45, to hear Paul talk about it, and not to miss Becky and Amy. And then we have these next steps group that gathers in between roundtable meetings to talk about the BIP update. And I think those conversations have been productive and really delved into some of those issues. So looking forward to our next roundtable meeting, and to just really not avoid getting back on my soapbox about the fact that we have an opportunity here. And I think Eric Kuhn, through the American Rivers article just recently, really stressed it is time to align ourselves, water policy in this state, in this basin, with what science has been telling us, what the nonprofit work has been about, and citizens about this diminishing resource, and that we can't cut back on our demands, and we've got this over allocation, and we have climate change, and we're looking at this incredibly dry landscapes, and the lower basin states are going to take this on probably most immediately with the Bureau of Reclamation, but it is also time for us. And as we look at our water plan, we do have our model, and it is that hot, dry future. And I think that is, we need to align our work and have a strategic alignment of our funds, our dollars, our efforts that really flesh out what that hot, dry future is, what are our best ways to address that, and how can we plan for the worst, as we all know, and Ken Salazar is our spokesperson, but water's our lifeblood. And we need to be able to protect the industries and our riparian areas and our wildlife, et cetera, going forward. And I'm for one extremely concerned that this is the normal. It is that hot, dry future. How can we align our work and take on something bold and explore? One, bring in the science to better inform us and where this is going. And we have incredible experts available to us, starting with Brad Udall. And I think take bold action. Look at what Israel has done with their water resources, and Australia. And we're in a very critical time, and we can't wait another decade because we can see the rate of acceleration. So I appreciate all the work that's being done here, and look forward to staying abreast with groups like the Middle Colorado Watershed Council and others as we anticipate this year and what it's going to mean to the communities and to our agriculture communities as well. So that I'll call that the end of my report, but we do have one other slide that will show the dam structure. And so you can see where the line is there, where typically, it's not breaching, but at that level, but certainly we haven't seen higher years, and we know that there'll be a lot of demands on our storage, and Route I being one of those buckets that's going to have to be really carefully managed going through the balance of this summer and going into the fall if it continues without the monsoons and we enter another winter with the dry levels. So that's me and my soapbox, and I hope that we will work together to do incredible things for the state using a vision and the science and the information we have available to us.
Thank you so much, Director Schwartz. Are there any questions? All right, seeing none, let's continue our journey to San Juan, San Miguel, Dolores River Basin. Director Hawkins.
Thank you. And great directors' reports all around today so far. Hard act to follow. I'm going to start my report with the sad news. I know that the last time we were here, I was reporting the passing of a water leader, and since then we've had another in our basin pass away. Doug Stowe was a longtime water leader, Dolores County Commissioner, board member of the Southwestern District, and member of the Roundtable. He provided steady and thoughtful and kind leadership over the years, and it was a real blow to me to hear that news, and just wanted to extend my gratitude for his service and my deep condolences to his family and our entire water community down here. On happier news, I was really pleased to see in Director Mitchell's director's report the news of the Himes Creek Award, and just wanted to thank all of the staff from both the Forest Service and the CWCB who worked on it, but also the staff from many of our local organizations, including the Dolores Water Conservancy District and the Southwestern District, who worked really hard to come to a good resolution on that issue. Also wanted to take a minute to welcome Rob into his new position, and to say just a few words about Linda. Linda, I think a lot of women who work in the water community look to you as just an incredible example of what strength and leadership looks like in the state. You are leaving some really big shoes for the rest of us to follow in. And I just have to say that whenever I had a chance to go out in the field with you, I always wanted to be in your boat or your car because I knew that if we spotted wildlife, it would just be incredibly fun. So over the years, it's just been a real pleasure to get to know you personally. Thank you so much for your work. Thank you for protecting rivers in my basin. And I hope that you'll come down and get back on the river with me again in your retirement. So I'm going to focus the rest of my report on the conditions in the San Juan and the Dolores basins for this year. And, you know, it was a little hard for me not to put a slide deck together for this, but I really don't think that the regular drought maps or the SWE graphs that we tend to put up paints a picture of what's happening in the basin. And so I'm going to try to do that with words today. So I think you'll remember me reporting last year. Conditions were pretty hard last year, but a lot of our reservoirs came in with some supply at the beginning of the season. And that was just not the case going into this year. So we were set up with low reservoir capacity, really dry soils, no monsoons, and a below average snowpack for the year. So what this means in the basin this year is that we're rolling into another dry year without the benefit of our storage supplies. I've reached out to reservoir managers and water users across the basin, and the numbers that I'm hearing are that our reservoir supplies are as low as 0% in some basins. And I think the highest I've heard is about 65% in some basins. So that's really not much storage supply to work with. We're also, you know, even though the sort of snowpack was a little under average, but not terrible because of low soil moisture, we're looking at runoff numbers that are more like 30 or 35% in many of the basins. So we're not going to get that refill and have supply available. So I think that a really good sort of deep dive example of this is what's happening on the Dolores project this year. It's the fourth worst year on record. And you know, what we're seeing in that project is that the municipal and industrial users are protected. They'll get their water this year. The senior users on the system that had sort of pre-project water rights in the system are sitting at about 50% of supply, and the project is sitting between 5 and 10% of supply. So what does that mean for water users in the basin? So for irrigators, it depends on whether the irrigators have water out of the senior supply or the project supply. But I think across the board, what I've been hearing is that many operations might get one cutting of hay per year. For those folks who rely on the project supply, I'm hearing water pooling, fallowing, some return to dryland farming. It is going to be a really hard year for those operations. And the Colorado Sun just published an article yesterday about the Ute Farm and Ranch Enterprise and what that means. There are implications for tribal employment. There are financial implications across the board for producers in the Southwest Basin this year. And I think it's worth noting that this isn't a 1 or 2 year issue. We've been in a recurring drought cycle since 2000. And so we're starting to hear from producers that there are financial issues that are being driven by multi years of shortage and drought in the basin. So when Director Mitchell said yesterday that, you know, we're taking shortage this year, yes, we always take shortages in our basin. This year, it's really severe. So what does this mean for, you know, the non-consumptive uses, the environmental and recreational uses? Again, I'll focus on Dolores for a minute, but I'll also talk about some other concerns that are down here. So for the Dolores River, there's 2 fisheries that Colorado Parks and Wildlife is looking hard at this year. There's a tailwater trout fishery below the dam, and the report is that we're just expecting significant mortality in the tailwater fishery. There's just not going to be enough water to support that fishery. Further down on the river, the big sort of management issue is the sensitive warm water native fish. They're not endangered fish. They're the 3 species that are subject to the multi-state range-wide agreement. So they're fish that we're trying to keep from becoming threatened or endangered. Right now, we're expecting that the flows that will be released below the dam will be between 8 and 10 cubic feet per second this summer and down to 5 cubic feet per second this winter. For context, the decreed in-stream flow on this stretch is 78 CFS for sort of minimum base flow. So that's really low. The report from Colorado Parks and Wildlife is that there's a real potential for population level impacts on those 3 warm water species. So the problems range from high water temperatures to, the riffles essentially dry up and the fish get isolated in pools. There's predators in those pools. There's smallmouth bass in this system, but there's also predation from terrestrial and avian sources. So I think we can expect a pretty hard hit to that fishery in the Dolores system, which is one of the strongholds for those 3 species. There are some pretty major potential implications across the board for the state's interest in managing those species and also the sort of interstate agreement on management of those range-wide. I think it's important to note that issue is not only on rivers like the Dolores, where there's a big main stem dam. The free-flowing rivers, including the San Miguel River, are also seeing enormous water challenges, low base flows, shortages to irrigators, potential for fish kills because of low dissolved oxygen and high water temperatures. Our angling and whitewater boating season will definitely be affected by the low flows. Colorado Parks and Wildlife will be monitoring stream conditions in the fishery for any recreational closures. And then on top of this, we layer on the increased wildfire risk this year, which is a real concern despite the fact that there is incredible work going on throughout the basin to mitigate wildfire risk. So I think, we're tough and resilient in this basin. We're used to shortage. We manage through drought pretty much every year. But this trend of the repeating drought years really has me concerned. And I would just say that I've seen 2 trends in my basin. And one is that these kinds of conditions sow sort of fear and divisiveness in places, and some trends that these kind of challenges pull people together to look for solutions. And I would just say that may ripple out to the state. And I would encourage the leadership out of this board to try to pull people together and see what we can do to address challenges in ways that work locally, and know that this is also the context that sits behind some of the really tough discussions that we are set to have in this basin. So sorry for a bummer of a director's report, but I wanted to paint the picture of what water use looks like down here this summer, and I will conclude my report.
Thank you, Director Hawkins. Are there any questions? Well, seeing none, let's continue on to the Gunnison. Director Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. I was thinking what does Zoom remind me of, and I finally decided it was Hollywood Squares. I will certainly be happy when this is over with. I think that our next meeting will seem more like a family reunion than a meeting of the Conservation Board. But getting into my report now, of course, drought is the story in this basin. Vivian, you could go ahead and advance that. I do have the map, Celine, that shows where we're at, and I'm happy to see that the colors are somewhat brighter on the other side of the slope. And I heard somebody talking about reversing that flows from west to east, east to west, which would be Grande. The next slide is the snowpack in the Gunnison Basin. The similar years, it was interesting to me, they're plotted here. The similar years were 88, 2020, 2013, and last year. And what last year means is that we're into our second year here in the valley. You could go ahead and advance that, Vivian. My project's operating at 70%. We have a call being administered on the Untitled River. The call is at the priority of the Ridgeway storage. And what this basically does is cut the decrees above us to the decreed amount, and they're not taking any extra water up there. Our neighbors in the Gunnison Basin are not as fortunate as we are. The North Fork and the Surface Creek area, Cedar Ridge, are in dire shape. They don't have the reservoir storage going in, whereas our storage is basically full. We're actually storing some second fill at Taylor. Our accounts in Ridgeway are full. This spring has been a test of us in more ways than one. If you want to advance the slide, you can see the first wreck of two we had. This is a picture of our glory hole at Chavanaugh Falls. This is used when our power plant goes down there. The water comes over the old falls then is run through here. And we take a portion of that down the CQ lateral, and the rest of it goes into Coal Creek, which is really the M&D Canal. This spring, when we started our operations, the structure collapsed, and with thanks to Williams Construction and CNC Concrete, we flat didn't have the time to jump in and repair this. And if you advance the slides, you'll see the great job they did for us repairing this structure. The next slide, I feel very fortunate. No one was hurt. The trailer hitch failed as he was rounding the corner and capsized our excavator. I think the story could have been completely different if this had happened in town or heaven forbid on US 50 here in the valley. So we were fortunate in that respect that one, no one was hurt, and it wasn't more serious than it was. Vivian, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. The Gunnison Basin Roundtable met this past Monday. Becky Mitchell attended, and thank you, Becky. We received an update on our BIP. This work is under the direction of Luke Gingrich, and he's doing a fine job for us, and really have a document I think all the members of the roundtable and the public in general in the Gunnison Basin can be proud of, and look forward to the completion of that report. We approved 3 WSRF grants, and we have a demand management committee that continues to work on establishing a policy statement for the Gunnison Basin. Aspinall operations, the spring flows are complete. This year it was only 1,600 CFS. In a normal water year, if we ever see this, it ramps up to something like 8,000 CFS. and durations of up to 2 weeks. And this year it was just a single day's duration. So we're past that. The last thing I wanted to discuss just briefly is, and Kevin Rain alluded to this yesterday, the Attorney General's office and certainly the Department of Water Resources is involved in it. They have reached the conclusion, and I think rightfully so, that they will not administer a call on a Gunnison tunnel call on the Gunnison River, which would affect the irrigators in the upper Gunnison. This story will continue, no doubt, but basically if there's water flowing over our diversion dam, we don't have a right to place a call on it. There is no water right below the diversion tunnel. That the record of decision for the environmental impact statement established, but there was never a water right, an in-stream flow right placed on that section of the river. The outcome of this is not known. It may be that the Bureau Rec comes to this board and seeks an in-stream flow right, which would then allow my organization to place a call on that river. They may just forego that, and that which would be definitely beneficial to my project, because then we would use Bureau Reclamation storage in the Esplanade unit as opposed to our Taylor rights. The last time that a call on the Gunnison River was administered was in 2012. And the result of that call was something like 25 second feet. 25 second feet at the tail end of the ditch on this project is a lot of water, but when you look at the big story where we're diverting something like 1,300 CFS, that's not going to solve a lot of issues. And I guess the other thing about it is the irrigation in the upper Gunnison, the way they flood irrigate those mountain pastures, allows for that retention, and we're able to at least gather some of it in the fall of the year when we really need it. So I guess what I would say is I can create enough hate and discontent in the Uncompahgre Valley without placing a call on the Gunnison River. So stay tuned. More to come on this story, and I'll be sure to inform you all. That basically concludes my report. I thank you. As you can see, I couldn't spell Anderson there. I don't know who Anderon is, but thank you.
Thank you, Director Anderson. Any questions? Seeing none, Director Trick, you are next from the North Platte.
Good to see everyone, and let me know if you have problems hearing me. I had some bandwidth issues going on yesterday, so if I freeze up or something, just wave and I'll try to start over. So just wanted to do a kind of general discussion about the conditions we're seeing up here right now. We're definitely similar in that we are facing storage shortages this spring already. Most of the reservoirs here were frantically attempting to fill this spring before the switch happens storage season to irrigation season, and including an issue that we had with a reservoir that's pretty high up on the system that needed to drain and draw down that entire reservoir very early in the season in order for them to start construction work and rehabilitation work that they needed to do, which involved trying for other reservoir operators trying to frantically get ditches and other things, infrastructure open from snow and ice so that they could capture the drawdown from the reservoir that was higher up. So it took a lot of coordination here between water users in order to maximize that, because that reservoir was attempting to draw down prior to April 1. And I'm not sure if many of you have been to this basin, but prior to April 1, we're still frozen in snow and ice, and you can't get water down the ditches to fill reservoirs because of that. Or it could also cause snow and ice to start moving down the system that otherwise wouldn't, and destroy infrastructure. So that was a big challenge. A few of the reservoirs did get full, but Walden Reservoir definitely was not able to fill completely before the irrigation season was declared. So we're already seeing a shortage in our storage right now, which will affect us later on in this season, because I'm assuming we will need to use reservoir water later on in the growing season this year in order to supplement the low river flows that we're seeing. So similar challenges with storage here as in elsewhere that you've heard. And we do also have a call on the Michigan River right now that has been in effect for over a week. And that will likely stay on at this point unless we can get some more storms. We did get a few rainstorms last week, which were great, but as you all know, with a deficit in the soil moisture, it kind of just soaks right in there, and you don't usually see a lot of it if you're already running on a soil moisture deficit. So similar challenges here, and we hope we can get some good rains or precipitation. And I'm not sure I'm too optimistic about that at this point, looking into the summer, but I'll keep my fingers crossed. And of course, obviously, everybody knows that we had a wildfire on every side of our basin last summer, just surrounded by them. And so we hope that does not repeat for this summer and this fall. I'm going to try to keep this short because I do want to show a short video at the end of my report. So I'll just mention that the roundtable since our last CWCB meeting has met 3 times, March 23rd, April 20th, and May 17th. So there have been a lot of WSRF projects coming through the roundtable. They've been really busy since March, and also working on continuing the BIP updates. So there's been a lot of activity with the roundtable. And I believe our next meeting will be pretty soon as well, around June 1. So there's been a lot going on there. And so, like I said, I want to make it short because I do want to show a short video. It's about 8 minutes long. But the reason I'd like to show that is for some of the new board members and others that may not be familiar here with our basin. And we are different than other basins up here. And we primarily use flood irrigation. And we are very, we're just very different from everybody else. And so this video kind of shows that. And it will highlight a few things that I would want to highlight about this basin, which one of which is the benefits of flood irrigation to providing habitat for wildlife. We are one of the major migratory flyways here in this basin, and the flood irrigation does provide wetland to support those migratory populations. And without that flood irrigation, those areas otherwise wouldn't exist. And another thing I'd like to highlight is the Supreme Court decree that governs our water use here, which we don't have an interstate compact that governs our basin. We have a Supreme Court decree. So a lot of people don't know that. This video also mentions that, and including the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program that we are also a part of, which a few people might not know about, and just know the importance of that program to this basin as well. So I will go ahead and let the video roll. And if there are questions afterwards, feel free to ask. But otherwise, that will conclude my report. So thank you.
The valley narrowed as we ascended, and presently divided into a gorge through which the river passes as through a gate. A beautiful circular valley of 30 miles in diameter, walled in all around with snowy mountains, rich with water and grass, fringed with pine on the mountainsides below the snow, and a paradise to all grazing animals.
More than a century and a half later, Colorado's North Platte Basin is still a bit of the Old West, mostly untouched and brimming with wildlife habitat. Rimmed by 3 mountain ranges in north-central Colorado, North Park is a high intermountain basin that drains north into Wyoming. The North Platte River grows out of the valley's many tributaries, supporting irrigated agriculture along with incredible wetland resources. Harsh winters and short springs bring mild green-filled summers that ranchers devote to a wild hay harvest while our livestock graze. Truckloads of high mountain hay are delivered to buyers along the Front Range, while urban dwellers cross over the divide seeking refuge in the basin's great outdoors.
The working rancher today is caught between two worlds. The one we want to maintain and pass along to our children. The other is being shaped by a rapidly changing landscape and economy. The basin's interests are deeply tied to the rest of Colorado, as loss of farmland to development decreases the capacity to process our cattle and use the feed we grow in North Park. Family ranching is a shrinking economy as small ranches are no longer profitable without alternative sources of revenue. An increasing amount of land is in the hands of absentee owners, causing a shift of irrigation interests and possible abandonment of historical water rights. Depopulation in the valley is also a result of losing other big industries, timbering and mining. Our basin is facing the same widespread challenges happening throughout the West, balancing traditional and emerging water supply needs, sustained drought, and managing beetle-killed forests that threaten our most valuable resources. These unknowns have ignited more thoughtful conversations and proactive planning to address North Park's future.
Over the past decade, our group of dedicated stakeholders have gathered monthly in Walden. We come from all walks of life: ranchers, local business owners, environmentalists, and government representatives. Our group of various water interests collectively represent one of Colorado's 9 basin roundtables, a platform that ties communities together based on a mutual need for support and collaboration. The North Platte Basin Implementation Plan was created by the Roundtable, identifying goals and highlighting projects to meet basin-specific water needs. It also provides critical grassroots input for Colorado's water plan set forth in 2015. These locally driven solutions are broken into 4 categories, representing those who live, work, and play in the North Platte Basin.
Make hay while the sun shines is imperative around here. Our agricultural heritage is critical to the local economy and landscape, which is based around cattle ranching and hay production. Water use in the basin is dominated by irrigated grass related to ranching operations, with over 400 irrigation ditches diverting from the main stem and numerous tributary streams throughout the basin. Flood irrigation is still the practice during the short growing season. While it is labor-intensive compared to other methods, delayed return flows from irrigation maintain river flows year-round. Aging infrastructure is of concern as it limits the use of historical water rights and amount of irrigated land. The Roundtable continues to support projects that restore, maintain, and modernize critical water infrastructure to preserve current uses and increase efficiencies.
It is a greener future for all with agriculture. What's seen as excess water use has hidden benefits. By flooding our hay meadows, ranchers have helped maintain these man-made wetlands. The contiguous, relatively unaltered riparian corridors are the most significant asset of the watershed, offering the most extensive habitat for fish, waterfowl, shorebirds, and aquatic mammals in the state. Delayed irrigation return flows provide benefit to environmental and recreational water uses in the North Platte Basin. Multi-purpose projects have been implemented for the benefit of both consumptive and non-consumptive uses, such as headgate improvements and stream rehabilitation. Year-round fishing in streams, rivers, and public lakes boosts tourism revenues in the region as flood irrigation helps keep gold medal waters healthy and outfitters busy. Public lands provide endless outdoor recreation opportunities, from wildlife viewing and hunting to snowmobile and boating activities. Additionally, many private ranches in the basin have developed or leased their fishing and hunting access to add to the agricultural-based revenue.
As Colorado's population is expected to double by the year 2050, the North Platte is the only basin that does not foresee a gap between supply and demand for municipal uses. Oil and gas development has recently expanded in North Park as an alternative revenue stream that helps sustain the local economy. The Roundtable is also supportive of industry setting up to use beetle kill timber as a resource. Increasing economic development and diversity through strategic water use is imperative in securing a sustainable future for the basin while maintaining a healthy watershed.
The unique and primary factor governing water use in the North Platte is the United States Supreme Court decree involving Nebraska, Wyoming, and Colorado. Water use in the basin is also governed by the three-state agreement of the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program related to endangered species recovery efforts on the Platte River in central Nebraska. The agreement allows for flexibility in the types of future water use by limiting the amount of water that can be diverted from Colorado's North Platte Basin while the species recover. The collection of better stream flow and evapotranspiration data will be useful in understanding the complex hydrology of the region for more effective water management. This gives the basin a certainty in the amount of water it can use. Our primary goal is to maintain and maximize the consumptive use of water permitted in the decree and the baseline depletion allowance of the three-state agreement.
We can almost certainly anticipate some parts of the future by examining current trends and cycles that influence North Park life. This basin will be greatly influenced by how Colorado manages its water supply gap over the next 20 to 30 years. The potential of agricultural dry-up along the Front Range would result in an industry-wide domino effect, negatively impacting North Platte agriculture and food security in the state and beyond. Conserving working landscapes means creating a more sustainable, productive relationship with the land despite outside influences. The increasing number of visitors to our mountain paradise gives us an opportunity to show them the value of ranching lifestyles and appreciation for the natural world. This land teaches us important lessons about stewardship, ecological limitations, and looking to one another to make a living in the West work.
Thank you, Director Trick, for that great presentation and for sharing with us the taste of your community. Are there any questions for Director Trick? All right, then let's move on. Last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Director Sakata of the South Platte River Basin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Boy, you guys raised the bar high. I didn't know these presentations were. I am kind of embarrassed by mine now. Oh well, you guys are gonna see a bunch of pictures of my farm. So here we go. So anyway, as we just saw, I always feel like a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I included, as I said, pictures of our farm. This was actually one of our farms as I was planting it. It was an onion field, and I think probably some of you know Christy Bodie with, I can't remember her company's name, Moxie Crane or something. Well, she contacted me, wanted to take some pictures of, or some video footage of our farm. And so I was actually planting, looking around to see what she could actually take a picture of. And all of a sudden, as I took this picture with my phone, and I saw all the houses. And it was like, it's funny how it kind of sneaks up on you. I mean, as a farmer, I complain about all the traffic, all the people, all the trash, the complaints about noise. But until I actually took a picture of it, it was like, wow, where did all these houses come from? And so it was kind of interesting. But this is this pivot actually happens to go only 3/4 of the way around because, again, in our area with all the growth that's going on, we don't have big, vast acreages of land. And so when we put a pivot on, sometimes it's very restrictive how far it can go. It uses surface water off of one of our irrigation canals in the new Bratner Ditch Company. So it's surface well ran. And we'll go to the next slide if we can. And so I debated whether to show this picture because I felt kind of guilty. I know how much the rest of the state is really struggling. But we've been very fortunate in the Front Range to have a series of really wet upslope storms. This was actually a picture from the middle of March storm where my backyard actually got almost 24 inches of snow finally. And so we're just so very thankful of that, what happened. But as has been said, and I'm glad I included this comment originally, but I'm glad I did. I says, maybe I'm being naive, but I really think that as a state, it can be very productive if we have honest conversations of how we can help each other manage the risks we all face through these unpredictable water supplies. From a farming perspective, it's important to note that many of the drought mitigation strategies that I put on place on my farm this season are going to have to remain in effect, even though now it looks like our water supplies are in pretty good shape. We changed our cropping plans. We decided to fallow certain areas because it looked like we were going to go into extreme drought conditions. But because of how far in advance we need to plan for our crop inputs, I can't change those things now. So even though it doesn't looks like we're not gonna face the drought conditions we had, my income is still gonna be reduced because of the efforts I did in order to plan for that drought. Why don't we go to the next slide? And that's where I think Director Dutton, I think you mentioned it, but one of the important tools is, just being able to plan and forecast what we're going to be facing, I think is critical. This is a picture of that same field, except looking not at the houses, but looking toward the west. That's Long's Peak in the background. And as all of us know, I'm a Colorado resident, why so many people are moving here is because it's such a great, wonderful place to live. Here's a list of some of the meetings. As was mentioned, I've tried to sneak in a lot of the meetings lately since they are remote. Really thanks to the CWCB staff for organizing all these meetings. I also met with Deb Daniel, the general manager for the Republican River Water Conservation District. That's almost like a separate basin, but it falls within the area that I represent. So I'm trying to learn a lot more about the Republican Basin and what they're dealing with. The South Platte Basin has met twice since our last CWCB meeting, and as others have said, it's amazing to me all the volunteers and the hard work that they're doing to finalize the BIP committees are finalizing all their work and all the valuable input they put in. And also, like the other basins, we've received presentations from Amy and Emily about demand management, and I know the South Platte is really interested in hearing more and having discussions about the framework. So why don't we go to the next slide? This next slide is actually a picture of our onion planter. I actually plant all of our onions. And as most of you know, when the weather conditions are right, you have to pretty much run around the clock to get it done because you never know what the weather's going to be like the next day. So this picture is actually, I had to actually stop for breakfast. This was at sunrise. I actually had to stop for breakfast because the roads were east and west, and I couldn't see, when I was going east, I couldn't see where I was going. And when I was going west, I couldn't see the planter behind me. So I actually stopped and took a picture of this. But again, it's a beautiful place to live and work. But this slide really is just special thanks to CWCB staff and to you, my fellow board members. To be perfectly honest with you, I didn't realize everything that CWCB was involved with, but I guess I should have realized that because water touches all aspects of our daily lives. But especially with the packet size being less this meeting, I had the opportunity to reach out to a lot of you to ask a lot of questions. So thanks Lauren, Anna, Kevin, Matt and Cole, especially thank you for really helping me understand the loan process more. Russ, Alex, Sam, Amy and Greg, Kevin, everybody. I really appreciate all the help that you provide to me. Next slide, please. This next slide is really one of our onion fields with barley. We plant barley as a cover crop to protect onions from wind damage. It's 120 acres. So this happens to be out by the town of Hudson. And as you can see, the area around us is not as developed. So you'll have to excuse my amateur video here, but I just bought a new toy. So you guys get to see my new toy, my new drone in action. So you can see the different soil types that we're dealing with. And of course, the barley helps protect the onions. Onion seed is only about the size of a pencil point. And when it does finally emerge, it's this weak little stem that's probably the size of a hair. And so it's probably one of the wimpiest plants that we grow, but it takes a lot of care to grow it. Like I said, this field is closer to the town of Hudson. I think their growth is really going to start going on there because 76 is the least used interstate in the Front Range area. So I think we're really going to start to see a lot of growth. This farm is actually irrigated with alluvial groundwater that we augment through the Central Colorado Water Conservancy District. We did that. Some of the augmentations plans prior to all this spring moisture that we had, we're going to be facing a lot of what you guys have talked about, pumping curtailment. This farm, as I mentioned, was augmented through Central. It started off, we were going to get 45% of our allotment. Later in March, they announced it, or in April, they announced that it was going to go up to 50%. And I just looked at their website and may increase that a little bit more. So we really feel fortunate. Thanks also to Commissioner Greenberg. We had I think 2 weeks ago when USDA Secretary Tom Bill was here, small group of us did have the opportunity to visit with them. And we definitely talked about water infrastructure as being an important consideration as they move forward. Next slide, please. That's really going to make you dizzy, isn't it? Sorry. This one's really going to make you dizzy. So this is corn planting, working around the clock on weekends, when conditions are right, of course. This is actually a very small piece of farm equipment, and we are forced to use this small size of equipment because of the traffic that's in our area. It's just impossible for us to move the larger pieces of equipment around. It's hard to see from this video, but when on the green ridge in the background is actually the runway for our aerial applicator. And so for any of you that are using drones or know somebody that has drones, really be sure that they understand the FAA regulations, because aerial applicators are scared to death of these drones, and I don't blame them. They're a real risk for them. Next slide, please. In July, I'll be hosting the board of directors from the Kentucky Farm Bureau, and they had asked, well, what can we see when we come to Colorado? And since I got my new toy, this is a picture of actually the Fulton Irrigation Canal diversion structure off of the South Platte River. This was taken just about a couple weeks ago. And I also, again, when I talked to Director Jan, he mentioned that at the North Sterling, they should finish up on their automation project this week. And again, thanks to the CWCB for the loan that they received on that. You can see we were very fortunate. This is pretty updated. We actually got a couple of CWCB loans to rebuild this structure. And we're really fortunate too that we have, carriage agreements with Denver Water, with South Metro, really assisted us in being able to upgrade this. And Chairman Brody talked about water temperature. One of the issues we faced, we had to put a screening system on this because our measuring wire, which is along the curve, was being plugged up by allodia, other aquatic plant debris, and of course trash. And we attribute that partly to the increase in temperature of the water coming down from the city of Denver. Also, one of the something we didn't expect with the screening system was that we're having to deal with syringes that we actually pick up in that trash too, which is a shame. Also, some exciting news, I think. It's kind of gone under the radar, but Central on May 15th delivered its first water into the Chatfield Reservoir to fill part of that reallocation space. So I think that's exciting. They've been working on that project, I think, for over 35 years. Next slide, please. Talking about some of the challenges that we face in growing on that urban rural divide is that I think Director Gibbs mentioned about what was it called, the Care for Colorado Week, where respect for public lands. I wish we could educate people more the respect for private property as well. And these are pictures. It's like we're always dealing with this anymore. People just not respecting private property rights. They take their ATVs through our fields. They think four-wheel drive vehicles, they want to go have fun in the mud. They drive it through our fields. They get stuck. We have to go pull them out. The trash of appliances, mattresses. It's really a challenge. That's one of probably the most frustrating things. And I don't know. I think even though I use it, I hate Google Maps now because, or at least a lot of these people that when they get stuck in our fields, tell us, "Well, Google Maps sent us here." It's like, really? Oh my gosh. So anyway, next slide. So again, real big thanks to CWCB and a special thanks for making the packet only 250 pages this month. I really enjoyed that. When that March, when I saw 2,000 pages, I said, what the heck did I get myself into? And thanks to all of you. I really am looking forward to working with all of you. So thanks.
Thank you, Director Sakata. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we are at our morning break. We're a bit behind schedule, so let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 10:35.
Hey, good morning, Vivian. Can you hear me okay? All right, let me just try to share my screen. How's that look?
Bill, you sound good. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you too, Kirk. I don't have as good a backdrop as you, though. Got an ugly office. So flipping through the slides okay? Working all right?
Looks good.
Okay.
Bill, we're going to try to be very efficient with our time today.
But I heard that, Becky. So I totally respect that. I'll move through my slides really quick. So.
Oh yeah, thanks. And then it's kind of a joke with Kirk and I because Kirk always runs over.
Okay.
And it's not really a joke. I'm actually very angry every 2 months.
Help me out here.
I'm going to try, Kirk. I'm going to try. And, if we have any interesting questions to Becky, I can certainly offer to defer those. I'll talk with anybody offline.
We're fine. I take what you need. But the reason you're at the end of the agenda is because of Kirk's bad behavior in previous board meetings.
Well, I've got to align myself with somebody else then next time.
That would be wise.
But he's actually, this board meeting, he's doing great. So he's moving up the chain. He might get back to the beginning.
Okay, well, I don't want to put any demerits to the end of a good meeting. So
if you want to really mess with Kirk, you could go really long and then he'll be staying here for the next few.
I'll try to keep you out of trouble, Kirk. So I'll just go off my video and mute. I'll leave the presentation up if that's okay. And then just jump back on when folks come back.
little virtual cowbell. All right, let's go back on the record at 10:35. We are on agenda item 26, the dam safety branch update. Kirk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kirk Russell, Finance Section Chief, CWCB. This agenda item is an information-only item, and I want to do a quick introduction of Bill McCormick, the Dam Safety Branch Chief. And I need to share with this board the appreciation we have in the finance section and our opportunity to work with Bill and his staff. You hear the loans that we present many times. We talk through dam restrictions and issues that are related to infrastructure around dams. And I can't give Bill enough credit and appreciation for how we work so well together. It's a tough job they have when you've got to restrict reservoirs, but his team, over the years, we've seen how they come with a, let's figure out how we can help and get things done and take care of the safety issue related to dams. And so I much appreciate Bill and his staff and how we've worked together over the years. So Bill wanted to speak to the board and share with some of the progress we've made with some funding from CWCB to his group. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Great. Thank you, Kirk. You hear me okay? And everybody see the presentation all right? Perfect. Yeah, well, thanks for that kind introduction, Kirk, and thanks very much to the CWCB board for allowing me some time today. It's been about 10 years since we've been getting grants from CWCB, so I thought it was a good time to talk about what we've done to build a 21st century dam safety program for the interest of Colorado. So before we talk about the 21st century program, just need to review what a 20th century program used to look like. It was deterministic, prescriptive, very rule oriented, and they tried to prescribe rules that created no risk policies. We thought that we could make sure dams didn't fail through strictly prescriptive rule-based activities. You know, you either complied with the rule or you got a safe storage restriction. There really wasn't much cost benefit or economic considerations or storage considerations. The dam was either met the rule or didn't, either had a storage restriction or didn't. And the consequences of the dams were really not looked at beyond the first critical structure that led to the hazard classification. So there was no distinction between a rural high hazard dam with 100 people living below it or an urban high hazard dam with 100,000 people below it. They tried to be very black and white. Contrast that with the 21st century dam safety program. We're moving to risk-based decision-making processes using probabilistic tools. We really look at consequences and look at the difference between those rural dams and high hazard dams and how we treat those differently based on the different consequences and risks. We look at acceptable and unacceptable risk criteria that are defined and currently used. We definitely take into account economics and how to maximize safe storage levels and work the gray areas. We can't have safe dams and maximize safe storage at the same time using some of these new tools. So dam safety really is risk management. We use this risk equation, the probability of the failure times the consequences. If we work on the probability of failure issues, reduce the potential for these failures, we reduce the risk. If we look at the consequences and understand those and find ways to reduce the consequences, we can do that as well. And we multiply those two factors together and we reduce the risk much quicker by looking at both of these at the same time in a risk framework. So the activities that we've engaged in to try to build this 21st century program with CWCB funds over the last 10 years are largely modeled after the federal entities. The Bureau of Reclamation and the Corps of Engineers have used these practices for numbers of years, and we've taken their model and tried to craft it into a state program. We've looked at the consequences. We now understand what the consequences are in populations at risk that live below all of our dams. We've really looked at ways to estimate the probability of dam failure using best practice tools and processes that we'll talk about. Much of these processes are really information-based. We need to know how the dam was designed, how it was built, how it's performed, in many cases over 100 years for our older dams that were designed and built in a different era. So we have digitized all our records so we can get access to those quickly and make these decision-making processes more efficient. We've established this acceptable, unacceptable risk criteria using some of the standard practices of the industry. And through this, we've built a transparent and defensible decision-making process. So what does this cost? What has TWCB invested? What have we leveraged from dam owners in some cases and from our FEMA grants in other cases? So this is a summary of the spending that we've done over the last 10 years. As we can see, about 1.8 million of TWCB funds, leveraged with about 2.8 million or 2.6 million of dam owner funds in the case of our emergency or of inundation mapping, and then much of our FEMA National Dam Safety Program grant. And by using those two things together, we leveraged about $4.4 million. Now we put these into those two bins, the consequence reduction piece and the probability of failure reduction piece. And the interesting thing about this table is we've largely split the funding about half. So we're being pretty efficient on reducing risk by looking at both of these factors that define risk in the same way. So just a bit about the inundation mapping program. This is, as you saw, $2 million we've got into that over a 10-year period. That's with our original cost share pass-through grant program with dam owners. We got dam owners to engage and pay for on average about 40% of the cost of inundation mapping shapefiles. We created a geodatabase which allows us to do some neat GIS manipulations and information gathering. So that's what this slide shows. Our geodatabase of all the inundation maps we've accumulated across the state. We compare that to the 5.8 million population, and then we look at our population at risk tool, calculation tool that we built also with FEMA and CVCB funds. And that tells us that about 2.1 million people in Colorado live within dam failure inundation zones. That's about one in three Coloradans, which I thought was an interesting fact when we put that together. The tools that we built also include a social vulnerability analysis tool to give us some ways to prioritize our activities around these high and significant hazard dams to reduce impacts to vulnerable populations below them. We share this with our partners at Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and they actually use this in their state hazard mitigation planning activities as well. So the information piece, this is just a screenshot of our database that has all our new digital information in our Laserfish content management system. This was a 7-year effort. We've scanned every file from every dam that we had records for going back 100 plus years. We've also have a full paperless process since about 2014. So this has been invaluable over this last year when we were all working out of home offices. Any place with a Wi-Fi connection, we can pull up any records on any dams in Colorado. And we can also share this with engineers that are working for dam owners so they can assess this information quickly and efficiently. So on to the probability of failure pieces that we've added. This was the biggest single CWCB investment was the Colorado-New Mexico Extreme Precipitation Study. We really needed to create this groundbreaking science-based study to replace some old HMR estimation tools. The old tools were a pretty broad brush approach, which ended up with some areas of over-conservative estimates and spillways being too large, and other areas with under-conservative estimates and spillways that might need to get some work on them. We developed both deterministic and probabilistic tools. We also assessed climate change impacts and developed a climate change rule for our rules and regs out of this study. I'm pretty proud of the fact that it won a 2019 Colorado Lab Governor's Award for partnerships with all the entities that were involved in this study. We're also doing research on hydrology. Again, some of the existing tools around hydrology in mountain areas weren't really physically realistic. It was hard to calibrate what rainfall really occurred with what engineers were estimating. So we took a deep dive into this over the last 3 years with Colorado State University to create some physically based models. They're calibrated and grounded in real Colorado extreme rain events in various studies and basins across the state. These are graphs of two outflows in the black with our predictions from our new models in the red and orange. So we're getting pretty close. This study has academic rigor, but it also uses some existing tools. So the engineers that work for dam owners will be able to use these methods efficiently at reduced cost to dam owners. And then probably the cornerstone of our risk-informed decision-making processes is the comprehensive dam safety evaluations, the CDSE we call it. We didn't invent this stuff, but we did adapt it to a state perspective. We use the Bureau and Corps methods, which are dam owner perspectives, and a dam owner decision-making process is a little different than a regulator's. So we also researched and really like the state of Victoria down in Australia, best practices. They provide our regulatory perspective and have been doing this a bit longer than us. So within a combination of those two things, we developed these tools. We've peer reviewed those along the way with industry experts in risk analysis to develop the tools and the process. We did pilot projects, which were funded by CWCB, to let engineers run through our projects and see how much effort was required and how much it would cost if a dam owner wanted to hire an engineer to do these. So we've proofed the concept of these, and we've confirmed that the process is really working well. So this is kind of how this looks at the end of that analysis. We end up in a risk matrix that allows us to do risk-informed decision-making. The societal acceptance of risk, which is talked about in Corps and Bureau and the Australian documents, is that horizontal red line, that 1 in 10,000 probability of an event happening. The likelihood of dam failures is on the y-axis, the vertical axis here, and the consequences are along the x-axis. The important thing to point out here is that all of these boxes, whether red, yellow, or green, require some action of the owner. You know, red probably is spending money on fixes for dams. Yellow is doing more studies, additional monitoring, additional EAP work, and green is continued monitoring, continued EAP work. The process does consider the consequences. We found it to be really defensible. We can stand this up in front of anybody that asks and explain how we did it. And as we say, we like the action oriented. It doesn't let any dams just go, scot-free, so to speak. And this program is recognized across the nation as being a leader in this area of decision-making processes. Some of the other things that we get out of all the tools that we've developed is as we go through these CDSEs, this is a plot from a evaluation of a spillway at a dam in the Western metro area. And turns out this spillway was overbuilt by about 2 feet. So this, through the process of looking at some other problems at the dam, we identified for the owner that there might be the opportunity enlargement with the existing spillway at a relatively efficient cost. We've also used these tools to look at old restrictions. This is an example from the Southwest Colorado in the Cortez area of Taunton Dam that had a long-standing restriction. We took a deep dive into the root causes of that and decided that there really was a relatively low risk of that failure mode happening, and we were able to lift the restriction, but include some monitoring, EAP updating, and now we know the intervention steps. So if anything were to happen at this dam, it can be easily arrested and the dam maintained in a safe condition. And then finally, what we really want to do is look at our inventory of high hazard dams and make sure we're not missing anything. Make sure the failure modes that we see, that there isn't something latent that was built into the dam due to its history and it's the era that it was built, so that we can manage those risks and ensure consequence reduction. This happens to be a picture of Oroville Dam, which from their spring 2017 incident. And the forensic team that reported on this incident mentioned Colorado and New Mexico, two of the only states in the nation that are using these kind of tools that may have been able to identify this problem before it happened. And so that's what we hope to do with these tools in Colorado. I'm not going to dwell on this. This is the project list. I provided a PDF of this with the material so you can read that. I do want to summarize the return on investment, the economics of all these better decisions and better tools that we have. I've been to these things in enlargement potential, and these are owners of dams. There's 18 projects on the list. It includes all 7 water divisions and across 15 water districts, so really wide distribution. But we're looking at about 40,000 acre feet of increased storage, mostly to the use of the REPS tools and the mountain hydrology. We've also reevaluated restrictions and added 4,200 acre feet back into storage. And then we've evaluated spillways on a number of dams and the need for spillway improvements. And we found that through these analysis tools, the risk of those dams that we might have thought needed to be replaced was actually acceptable. And we could say that with a straight face. So we add all these numbers up. I included a nominal cost of $5,000 per acre foot of storage to multiply the storage potential numbers here. And I got that from the Gross Reservoir Enlargement Project, which is a $400 million project to capture about 80,000 acre feet of storage. And then for the spillway repair savings, I used a sort of an average number from our database of about $2 million per spillway. So we think we've provided about $250 million of return on investment of this $4.4 million investment to support the state water plan, to put CWCB funds to really good use for water in Colorado. So I'm a spokesperson for the dam safety branch, but it's certainly a team effort. We've got engineers in every water division and a couple field offices. Just really need to highlight the efforts of John Bacca on the inundation mapping pieces of the money we've used, Callie Bauer for some other consequence reduction activities in the high hazard dam release database. John Hunyadi was the leader of our CDSE tool set development. Mark Perry is really the technical brains behind the REPS tool and the CSU mountain hydrology study. But all the other engineers around the state have contributed, testing the processes, reviewing guidance documents, really proving and executing these methods, in their areas all around the state. So I report all that out, and I just wanted to put a bug in the board's ear and also the DNR reps on the call about a couple things that we're going to be asking for in the future. So you might see this information again. We really like the processes. We want to do these at a larger scale across the state, and we need some funding to do that. The first would be a high hazard dam risk prioritization project. We've got about 400 high hazard dams we want to do these CDSE processes on, but where do we start? Where is the risk the highest? Where is the potential for enlargement the highest? How can we combine some interesting AI tools that are out there with our readily available information to really tell us where to start and how to execute that? So there's $750,000 that we're thinking we might need for that. And then to complete the CDSEs on all the high hazard dams in the state, to really understand our risk, understand the potential for enlargement, and where we can do both those things using these great tools. So this is a long-term project over 10 years at about $1 million a year. If we can do 40 of these projects a year, I think we'll be, and we'll look back in 10 years and we'll be able to report on the really good things that we've done for the state around water. To do that, we are going to need some capacity building within the dam safety branch. So my ask for the DNR folks on the call today is, when you do hear about asks for FTE to manage this, just consider the good things we've done in the past and what a strong team we have to manage the risk, do our day jobs, keep up with hazard creep, the continuing increase in number of high hazard dams, and to manage these CDSE processes. If we can do all that with a little extra help, we can certainly ensure returns on future CWCB investments. So with that.
Thank you, Bill. Great report. I've had some recent exposure to your process, and I would agree it's a really, really important exercise, both for public safety and to make sure that we're maximizing our resources. So thank you. Director Mitchell, did you have a question?
Yeah, Bill, I just wanted to thank you for being here. This is so important. As someone who got to tour Orville after the issues there and seeing the impact to the community, this is such important work. And so, and it's critical. And so, especially when we talk about our high hazard dams. So thank you, Bill. And we're going to continue working together.
Great. Thank you.
And the cost to fix it is far more than the cost to maintain.
Agreed.
Director Schwartz, did you have a comment?
And thank you. And thank you again for your presentation, all the work of your department, how important that is. The PDF was not, I did not see that in our packet, so it'd be, maybe we can have that information forwarded to us, your breakdown of the different dams. And I've always maintained that when we have storage that's underutilized because of the dam structures, what benefit we have to the state by upgrading existing storage, fixing dams, as opposed to building completely new storage. And so that I'm hoping that information and that delta between what's available to us now and what could be available if those dams are in fact repaired sufficiently. And I do have a second question. Are you seeing when we're seeing dam repairs, how often we're integrating hydro facilities, hydroelectricity into those dam repairs or into retrofitting dams?
Yeah, we haven't seen that, as often as I know some folks would like. I think that's a, kind of a site-specific question. It's certainly a good fit for some places. So, but we haven't seen as much of that as I know is probably possible.
And so you have the information about the dams that need repair or retrofitting and what that additional storage could be?
We have some of that information, yes, and that's what some of this additional study that we're going to be looking for sources of funding for here in the future. That's what those will drill down deeper into those to really find out where the opportunities for enlarging existing facilities in the right places exist.
Thank you, Bill. Really appreciate you being here with us today.
Yeah, and I hope Vivian can share that PDF of the projects. Like I said, there's 18 projects, lots of interesting notes, and they cover everybody's area. So all the directors will be interested to see the dams in their area.
Okay, we'll be sure to get those out.
Thanks very much for everyone's time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to agenda item 27, floodplain rules and criteria manual update. Kevin.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Kevin Hauk, CWCB staff, here to start out agenda item 27. Also joining me today will be Terry Fay, who is the newest employee in my section. Just recently hired her with 35 years of experience, 12 in the private sector and over 23 in the public sector, including 19 years at the Mile High Flood District. So she's been a wonderful addition to our section, and I'm pleased that she'll get the chance to address you guys today. I think you're going to really like her. Let's see. So how do I start here? Fresh off your rulemaking hearing in January, I'm sure everybody could breathe a big sigh of relief that the rulemaking was done, and we are here now to present another opportunity for rulemaking for you this year. This will involve the state floodplain rules and regulations. And I'd like to start out with a little bit of background on these for those of you who aren't familiar with this. We have a number of the CWCB has a number of statutory responsibilities in regards to flood hazards. They're called out in a number of statutory sources. And we accomplish many of these responsibilities through a number of tasks, including floodplain regulations, risk identification through our floodplain mapping program, and then just through a number of special activities, which can include technical assistance, project management, and sometimes financial assistance and grants that we can issue to our local partners and then work with them. There's a couple documents that really help us with a lot of our work, and we're going to be talking about both of these today. The first is the floodplain rules and regulations, And the second is our statewide stormwater and floodplain criteria manual. The first of those, the floodplain rules, is of course a regulatory document that is approved through the CWCB. And then the second is the criteria manual, which is more of an advisory document, which is available as a resource to local governments that need it. And it can also back up some of the processes that we undertake through our floodplain rules. So one of the primary statutory responsibilities that the board has is the review and approval of floodplain studies for use in floodplain regulations. And you often see these come before you generally on the consent agenda. You even had a few on this meeting. Occasionally, if they're if they have issues that make them controversial, we can put them on the regular agenda, although that can be kind of rare. The primary purpose of the floodplain rules is to establish criteria for which these floodplain studies must have in order to pass the review and be approved by the board for use in local floodplain regulation. And one thing you'll hear is that when rules are adopted, we can only adopt references and guidelines that exist at the time of that adoption. We can't incorporate future adoptions into that. So one of the inherent problems with floodplain rules process is that once they're adopted, it just starts the clock, and once changes are made to scientific processes or national guidelines, eventually they just become out of date, and there's the need to bring them back up to date, which is going to be the primary purpose of what we're hoping to do during this process in 2021. Incorporated into the floodplain rules also are some policy statements that local governments must follow. We are not looking to revisit or review any of the actual policy that is inherent in the rules. This is more of a housekeeping process and bringing ourselves back up to date with national guidelines. I do want to thank some of the folks that are involved on the review end of this process, and that includes Terry Fade, who you're going to hear from in just a second. Also on my staff, we have Doug Mahan, who is our Community Assistance Program Coordinator and the State Floodplain Manager. And then also Marta Blanco Castaño, who is our Floodplain Mapping Assistant and works with Terry in the risk identification program that we have. Also with the Attorney General's office, I want to thank Jen Mealy for her help. Most of you know Jen, and Jen does an admirable job of keeping me out of trouble in many of the programs involved in my section. She's a great resource to have. Also, we have from the Attorney General's staff, Allison Robinette, who is a self-described rules enthusiast who likes rulemaking processes, which tells me a couple things about her. One, that she's a very interesting person, but also two, she's a great person to have on the team because she has a great attention to detail. And in fact, as we're talking right now, she's doing a deep dive into the rules and making some further recommendations for us. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Terry Fade, who, again, is the newest member of my staff and was hired during the COVID pandemic. So I believe this is her first opportunity to address the board. So Terry.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm Terry Fade. I'm the Floodplain Mapping Coordinator for the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And next slide, please. Flood risk analysis and mapping have evolved significantly over the last 10 to 15 years, and there have been considerable advancements in technology for data collection, engineering analysis, mapping processes, and data management systems. And in response, the Federal Emergency Management Agency has made some substantial updates and revisions to their risk mapping assessment and planning, or risk map policy, in December of 2020. So just recently, The policy and its associated documents define all the statutory and regulatory requirements for the National Flood Insurance Program flood risk mapping. And for us at the Colorado Water Conservation Board, it's really right now is a high priority for us to only revise the floodplain rules to account for additional methodologies and standards upgrades that have taken place as part of this December 2020 update. And this includes two-dimensional hydraulic modeling in addition to our traditional one-dimensional hydraulic modeling, which both have their place in use, as well as base level engineering, which is a large-scale rain-on-grid two-dimensional analysis for identifying initial flood prone areas that then can be further refined with the communities. And so these processes are used for flood risk identification and floodplain and floodway mapping. And by making these updates and referencing the current document policy or the current FEMA policies and associated documents, that'll bring our rules up to date and can be consistent with FEMA's updates. Next slide, please. So as Kevin indicated, we're already working on red lines for revising the rules, and we've been working with Jen and Allison to help with some of that right now. But our goal is to have the draft revisions completed in June and work with our stakeholders to bring the revisions to bring the rules up to date, and then to file the notice of proposed rulemaking at the July board meeting. And we're hoping to have adopted rules in November, file the adopted rules in November. This is a ambitious timeline for us, but it's a really important addition to the rules to account for these FEMA updates that allow the 2D modeling and the base level engineering modeling, which are standard practices that we're using with some current FEMA grants to initiate some of our flood risk mapping across the state. And with that, I'll turn it back to Kevin to talk about criteria.
Okay, great, Terry. Thank you very much. This is Kevin Hauk again. Can I get the next slide? And we'll take questions regarding either the rules or the criteria manual at the end. So I just want to also discuss a parallel process that we're looking to undertake right now. And this is for the statewide stormwater and floodplain criteria manual. The first version of this document was created back in 2006, so it's already 15 years old. And there were a couple sections that were subsequently added later on. But it's kind of come to our attention that this manual is very out of date and very much in need of an update. And it's something I've been wanting to undertake for actually quite some time now, but just haven't had the time or the resources to do it. But now with the rulemaking hearing coming in play, because this is a companion document to it, we feel it's really necessary to undertake this effort now. So again, the criteria manual is more of an advisory document that is available to local governments as a resource if they don't have their own criteria manual they can use. Because it's so out of date, I'd actually be surprised to know if there's any communities still using it today, but that is the point of the document. We'd like to bring that back. It does also help provide some technical basis that can be added to the rules as well. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that have happened since this was first created 15 years ago, I just made a list this morning of some of the things that I think were not captured in the original document that I think would be added through this. Our watershed restoration program was created after this document was created, although we did some of those activities prior. Fluvial hazard zone mapping, Colorado's water plan, and some of its attention to things such as forest health and stream management planning. Post-wildfire flooding. When this document was first created, I don't think I had ever done a single task related to a wildfire. Now local stakeholders come to the CWCB for assistance with wildfires before they're even put out, a big part of what we do. We've had the 2015 and especially the 2013 flood disasters. We have the 2010 rules and regulations, which were the last time those were updated. We've got new levee analysis procedures. And most currently, we now have a letter of map revision delegation program. So these are all new activities and new sections that we'll be looking to add to this. It's currently about a 2,000-page document, so this is no small task to be done. And what we're looking to do is incorporate this work in two phases. And the first will be everything related to floodplain mapping and the National Flood Insurance Program, so that it ties in very well with what we're trying to update with the rules and regulations that Terry talked about. Following the completion of that, phase two would be basically everything else in the document not related to phase one. So I will go over the timeline in a second, but I do want to comment that we did put together a list, or a steering committee with a number of stakeholders that will help guide the process for this criteria manual. It includes everybody that you see on the list right here. We have a very nice cross-section of professionals and local government officials with communities ranging from small to large, and also a good geographic distribution around the state. So I believe we've got very good oversight from this steering committee that will help us throughout the process. If I could get the next slide, Vivian. Okay, and here is the proposed schedule. This again is for the criteria manual, and we're looking at starting this really here any day now. We've pulled together the steering committee, and we're looking to start holding stakeholder meetings next month. We do look to have the phase one process done around the end of 2021. We'll see how the process goes, but that's what we're shooting for at this time. And then once that phase one ends, we will make some steering committee adjustments just to make sure that we're still capturing the expertise that is needed for the topics that are taking place in phase two. And we'll start that in early 2022, and then hope to bring this entire document around for board approval sometime around early 2023. If I get the next slide, please. And I believe that's all we wanted to say on this. This is an informational item only. We don't require any board action, but at this time, Terry and I are available for any questions the board might have on either the rules or the criteria manual.
Great. Well, Terry, welcome, and thanks to you and Kevin for the update. Sounds like you've got a big task ahead of you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? All right. Well, seeing none.
Question.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Couldn't get my buttons done. I did want to ask about, again, how climate will inform, I think it was brilliant. You identified all of these elements that are not even part of the manual at this time. So to the extent climate, we know we have in places, it'll be a wetter future because of the temperatures. And so the question is, to what extent will that be, that science be represented in your mapping and moving forward? To be state specific as opposed to maybe something FEMA will be providing, but how can we inform that for the state of Colorado?
Yes, thank you for that question, Director Schwartz, and that's a very good point. I listed off all those items, and that was far from comprehensive. And you brought up a couple other ones as well. We are working in climate change and resiliency activities related to that. Back when we published the first version of the criteria manual, I don't think I was even talking about climate change back then, but it's definitely something that we do now, and it will definitely be part of the discussion and part of any procedures and recommendations that we put into that in both phases of the criteria manual.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no additional questions, Thank you again, and let's move on to agenda item 28, water plan and BIP update status. Russ.
Hello, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. It's good to see everyone, and you're usually used to seeing me present, and I wanted to share that opportunity with staff today. So I have with me Kat Weissmiller on my team, as well as Sam Stein. We have just 6 slides, and we'll be pretty quick, but if you don't mind advancing to the next slide. I think I said it, but Russ Sands, water supply section for the record. I wanted to quickly just say, as we've looked over the last year, there have been some lessons learned, but, we hear that we've heard a little bit of that pushback of why we're moving forward with the water plan or the BIPs. And I just recognize, and I think we've heard it in almost all of your report outs and in things that Director Gibbs and Director Mitchell said yesterday, but between COVID, the economy, fire, drought, the lessons are clear. We have to be adaptive, and those things aren't going to wait for us. We have to keep moving, and if anything, hit the gas on those efforts. I think we also heard, in addition to these major issues, there are, 1,000 personal tragedies that everybody's been dealing with, and so I think it's important, and we've been trying to strike that note to be kinder now more than ever, and I know many of you have echoed that. There's also a consistent theme, I think, that we've heard, that diversity builds resilience, the foundation of the water plan. Many of the things that we're talking about with the Water Equity Task Force, all the conversations with the roundtable are about being more inclusive, not less, and in knowing that our strength really comes from bringing more people to the table and figuring out the right solutions that work for everybody. And I like this quote from Director Mitchell, but she said it at one of the roundtable meetings the other day, and it really resonated, I think, with everyone. But we have to be ready when the money's there. And I thought that was a really apt comment because, as you well know, that the heart of the BIP updates have really centered on, focusing first on projects and making sure that the project data is good. And now that, as you heard from Director Gibbs' report, it looks hopeful that we might be in a better money situation. Certainly, the roundtables have been doing a ton of hard work to get us there to be ready. And so that kind of leads me to my last few points, and you are all so gracious. But I wanted to say that over this last year or 2 years, the roundtables, the board, and staff, what a great staff helping us do a lot of this work too. But everyone has really shown up. And it's just a reminder to me that is right now we're looking out at the BIP and the water plan update, and we're thinking this is the biggest thing, but this is like pushing the boulder up the hill, right? And now we got to get it down the other side, and we're going to have to keep showing up as we move forward to implementation, because that's what it's all about. So with those thoughts, I will turn things over to Kat Weissmiller on my team.
Thanks, Russ. Kat Weissmiller, CWCB staff for the record. I'm excited to share with all of you today the work that CWCB staff have been doing during the scoping phase for the water plan update. On top of their normal workload, they've been incredibly proactive in scheduling, planning agendas, and putting together speakers to arrange workshops to hear what our stakeholders and the public want to see in the water plan update. These workshops have covered a range of topics and have usually ranged between an hour and a half to sometimes 4.5 hours. Altogether, between March and June, we've scheduled 13 different workshops, and we've partnered with over 20 organizations and agencies across the state. To date, we've done 25 actual hours of workshops, and we've had 40 staff or guest speakers at those workshops. And we've had about 600 attendees to date. And so we're really excited about the level of participation and the great conversations we've had at all of these workshops. It's been a really fun process. And then we're going to move forward into kind of wrapping up our scoping phase with a Riverside Chat 2, which will be held on June 8th. And as you guys probably remember, we had a Riverside Chat in January where we laid out the vision for the water plan update. This will be more same format, but it will be Director Mitchell and staff sharing the key themes that we heard during the scoping phase. So we're really excited about it, and we hope you all can attend. You can register by visiting engagecwcb.org. There's a button to click and register there. And then looking ahead, we'll be transitioning out of the scoping phase and into the drafting phase of the water plan update starting in July. We have a drafting kickoff workshop scheduled with our staff, and we'll come back to you and discuss our plan at the July board meeting. We'll also be kind of covering what we heard at the Riverside during scoping and shared at the Riverside Chat. Then from there, staff will be putting their heads down and putting pen to paper to draft the water plan update through about March of 2022. When they eventually come up for air again in April, we'll be in the finalizing stage of the water plan update, and we'll be spending time working to integrate all the new content and put the plan together and release a draft for public review in about June of next year. And from there, we'll be integrating public comments and finalizing the water plan update going until the end of December 2022. And again, we try to keep everything up to date on engagecwcb.org. So please feel free to check that out and learn more there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sam Stein to talk about the Basin Implementation Plan production timeline.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kat. Sam Stein, CWCB staff for the record. Thank you for the opportunity. Let me present this update on the Basin Implementation Plan timeline. There's a lot of dates in this presentation, so I'll keep it more general for simplicity. The Basin Roundtables are currently busy working on their Basin Implementation Plans, commonly referred to as the BIPs, along with their local experts, and have so for about a year now. The local experts are expected to have a 90% draft completed by June, at which point they will deliver this draft to the general contracting team and CWCB. The CWCB and general contracting team will provide an initial review, and a 100% draft will be completed by the end of June. Upon completion of the 100% draft, CWCB will be reviewing the BIPs for formatting and consistency, but we'll also collaborate with the Attorney General's office to make sure they align with board direction and address any sensitivities. This review is set to be completed by mid-August, at which point the BIP Volume 1 and 2 documents will be submitted to CWCB staff and the Basin Roundtables or BIP subcommittee, depending on roundtable preferences, for review via the CWCB, Engage CWCB website. The roundtable and CWCB staff review period is set to be completed by mid-September, at which point the CWCB, general contracting team, and local experts will work to incorporate edits per the review process. Next slide. And in mid-October, Volume 1 and 2 of the BIPs will be submitted for public review and a full roundtable review, if not done so already, via the Engage CWCB website also. And public comment will run through mid-November. And then from mid-November to January, edits will be incorporated into the BIP documents and public comments characterized. And then from mid to late January, the Basin Implementation Plans will undergo a finalization process and is set to be released in February of 22. And that's all I have. So with that, I'll throw it back over to Kat.
Thanks, Sam. So I know this presentation has thrown a lot of dates at you, and I'm sorry about that, but we do have just a few more that we want to put on your radar going forward. As I mentioned earlier, in June, we'll be having our Riverside Chat too. We hope many of you on the board and the legislature can tune into that. I think it'll be a great opportunity to hear what we've heard during the scoping phase. Then in July, we'll be back here to present to the board much of the same information that was collected during the scoping phase and sort of our plan and path going forward into drafting. Meanwhile, while we're drafting, the Basin Implementation Plan will still be moving forward. Their schedule will be continuing, and those will be finalized in January of 22. And I want to just take a moment to thank the roundtables for all of their work on that. It's been a lot of time and effort, and we really appreciate everything that they've done to put those together. Also, another ongoing and related group that will be working over the next year is our Water Equity Task Force. They met for the first time this week, and they'll be meeting several times over the course of the next year. And then in February, they'll be providing a feedback summary with some recommendations and ideas that we can incorporate into the water plan update going forward. So then in April, our staff will be coming up for air with after all of their drafting, and we'll be starting to compile the water plan update draft. We'll release that draft for public comment in June of 22, and it'll be out for 3 months for public comment. At that point, we'll be checking in regularly with the board and the legislature, and hope to get a lot of feedback at that time. we'll wrap that up in September, and then we'll be working on incorporating all the feedback we've received and finalizing the plan by the end of the year in 2022. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but we're really excited and happy to answer any questions you have going forward. So thank you all.
Thank you, Sam, Kat, and Russ. Great presentation. Are there any questions? Dr. Sakata?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, great work, you guys. I just want to know how many clones each of you have, because every time I sign on, you guys are there too. It's like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. But it's maybe not specifically related to this, but more about, as we've talked about, as I've heard on the roundtables, you know, so many of them are anxious to start meeting together, as we are as well. But again, that remote access has provided, I think, an opportunity for a lot of people to participate that haven't in the past. Are you working with the roundtables and the different groups to do, you know, a hybrid type model? Because as we saw, I think it was the North Platte, it was pretty challenging to hear those guys. You could hear that they were meeting together, but for everybody else, it was almost impossible for us to understand what they were saying.
Absolutely. Well, I was thinking the same about you, Director Sakata. I'm thinking you may have a clone. No, great question. And we haven't, I mean, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty about exactly what we'll be doing in the near term, but certainly as we look farther out this year, I expect we'll be in person more often. And yet you're absolutely right. It's allowed a whole new level of access that I think is really important. As of now, we've purchased Zoom accounts for all the roundtables for a year, so we have that. And my thought is, and happy to let Director Mitchell chime in if there's anything to add, but my thought is that we would evaluate through the process and see if that continues to be helpful, and maybe let each basin kind of adopt into that. But in my mind, it is helpful to potentially continue moving forward as an option, as I do think it allows access and allows access for you as directors and us as staff to not have to clone ourselves, which is also a benefit. So thank you. Great question.
Thanks, because I think some of them will need some guidance on how to set things up, or, you know, investment in some microphone equipment so that you can hear the whole group. You know, video may not be as necessary, but as long as you can see the presentations, seeing the people that are talking aren't as critical, but hearing them is really important.
Absolutely. And that's something that we've been talking about and we will continue to look into, but I appreciate that. I know that's something that Director Brown has championed as well.
Well, thanks. Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Are there any other questions? Well, seeing none, let's move on to agenda item 29, evaluating conserved consumptive use in the Upper Colorado. Alex, are you going to lead us through?
Sure am. Thank you, Director Brody. And I've been told by multiple folks to keep it short and sweet. And so if you do have any questions, you know, feel free to kind of follow up with the gentleman we have with us today. With that, I'll just do a quick little recap of this project while I'm sort of bringing up the presentation here. But this was a ATM project approved by the board last March. And then I think there was a subsequent grant approval through the ATM grant program last July as well. And really the focus of the project that we'll hear more about today is to answer sort of one critical research gap that's been identified as part of utilizing alternative transfer methods and sort of water conservation programs more generally on the western slope, particularly in higher elevation pasture systems. This has sort of been sort of an identified gap in terms of, you know, if we were to temporarily fallow these systems and sort of work with ranchers to conserve water in these systems, what are the long-term sort of impacts to yield, forage quality, recovery time, and kind of getting a sense of how these sort of voluntary, temporary, compensated programs can actually fit in within some of these higher elevation systems. So with that, I've got a pretty stellar team today. I've got Paul Bruchet, who I know many of you know, fifth generation rancher out of the Kremling area, also active in the Colorado River Basin Roundtable, and governor appointee on the IBCC. We've got Dr. Perry Cabot with Colorado State University. and Cooperative Extension, and then Aaron Jermingson with the Nature Conservancy, who is the Water Projects Director for the Nature Conservancy on the Colorado River Program. And so Vivian, I think I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen, if that's okay, and pull up Paul's drone footage. Give me 1 second here. Everyone can see that. Great. What get kicking us off here?
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. Thanks to everybody for being involved today. Great to see everybody virtually. Thank you to the directors for taking this time. The partnership involved with this project really just wanted an opportunity to give the board an update, staff an update, and also a big thank you based on the things that we're doing. Alex, I don't know if it's my computer or not, but the drone footage, if you can keep it, if you can start rolling it, is perfect. I actually really appreciate Director Sakata making the comment that he did, because you can see where I'm at right now, turning water on, participating in a meeting.
You see it now, Paul?
Nope, it's your inbox. This happened to me once, Alex. It's less than ideal.
Great. Hold on. Sorry about this, folks. Should have tried this earlier. How about now?
It's just locked on your your Google account.
All right. Well, Paul, why don't you keep talking? I'll try to figure that out.
Is it possible? I've got it on my computer here. Is it possible that I could share my screen?
Potentially. Hold on. How about that?
Oh yeah, you're in.
Man, okay. All right, sorry about that.
Well, thanks everybody. So with a couple days of board meetings here virtually, wanted to just give as much visual to this project as possible. We successfully implemented drying out 1,050 acres and studying water use, drying out another 150 acres starting June 15th of 2020 during COVID, thanks to funding from all of you. This is what a meadow looks like at 8,300 feet in elevation that is not irrigated. And this is what the reference field attached to that meadow looks like the same time of year when irrigated. So last year was a pretty extreme year to do this based on pretty incredible drought during the summer months in Grande County, Colorado. It was really neat yesterday. We all gathered, Nature Conservancy, CSU, everybody was up to make sure that instrumentation, everything's working. Here's the Eddy Covariance Tower. This is the on-the-ground Cadillac working to study what's happening. And again, this is all last year footage of what it looks like. Don't irrigate high altitude perennial ground. This particular location of this footage is pretty cool because it goes from non-irrigated to then irrigated reference that is green to then non-irrigated again. So outside of the specific tests, while this is not a demand management project in any capacity, it is a science and research project. It was pretty neat to truth test thoughts and strategies about how we control water. So the reason that this became the reference field for this particular project is that the up elevation neighbor did not want to participate. And so this is dealing with their tailwater going downstream. And then you get the view here going forward of then the downstream. And so we literally put earthen dams to block ditches to control water flow to create this condition. Everything we did within the project, you know, I'd call a total success. I would say accidentally, we irrigated approximately 18 acres out of 1,200 that were not supposed to be irrigated, and they were very short term, and something that I'd love to have further conversations with the board about. Leaky pipe and a railroad track, neighbor irrigating with more water in a free river system than anticipated kind of conversations. But overall, I think those percentages are pretty good. moving forward here, here's some footage of phase 2 of this project. While we're leaving most of the land in a natural state of recovery for evaluation of total water use, we are trying some simple farming techniques to actually speed recovery and actually evaluate this. And this is something for me that makes potentially agriculture water conservation very exciting. If you look at meadows that are in a sod-bound condition and you intensively stress them, and then you try and interseed different forages that perhaps are more drought resilient, perhaps different use of water, perhaps different ways of production, but most importantly for agriculture, looking at the nutrient value for livestock, stressing these meadows and then doing some simple farming techniques that evaluate how they can recover. We did this in very small acreages associated with the project. Each project participant, 2.5 acres per landowner in a high production area and a low production area is all that was done, but it'll be really neat in the coming years to evaluate how some of this recovery technique works, because I think of it as a little bit of a more holistic approach to water conservation for high altitude agriculture. And with that, I'm going to kick it to Mr. Derwinson.
Thanks, Paul. And let me pull this up. Everyone can see the PowerPoint this time, right? And not my inbox. Great. So with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron and Dr. Cabot. And yeah, thanks again, Paul, for that quick intro.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Alex. Great to see you all virtually this morning. Aaron Derwinson with the Nature Conservancy. I want to just cover a little bit of the kind of business side of this project before really giving most of the time back to Perry to do a little sneak peek of our results. And want to echo Paul's thanks to the board for your support of this project. In addition to the ATM funds that Alex mentioned, we also have a small Colorado Water Plan grant where we're doing some complimentary interviews with all the project participants, trying to get behind the scenes, a good look at really what's involved on the ground for these operators and their involvement in this project and making water conservation work in their operations. And so excited to share those results later this year. As we dive in, I think this is a good slide to show just the nature of this project and how it's set up, right? It's a side-by-side comparison study. And so we've got the treatment fields Paul mentioned, right, that got not irrigated in different ways last year. And then we'll compare those to our fully irrigated reference fields, looking at 3 main questions, right? What are the water use and water savings? What are the impacts to forage? And then what does that mean for producers' bottom line? How does it tie into the economics of their operation? You can go to the next slide, Alex. Really want to, so as you go back one to that partnership one, yeah, I really just want to emphasize that, with your support, we just have a very, very robust set of project partners that are supporting this project. It's being led and sponsored by the Colorado Basin Roundtable, and Kirsten Karath, I believe, is on in that capacity if we have any questions about the roundtable. And then, just a host of research universities engaged in doing the data collection and analysis, conservation nonprofits, helping support this and look at wildlife impacts and benefits potentially to stream flow, support from the board, and then support from other consultants helping us look at everything from stream flow impacts and water rights administration, looking at the impacts to bird habitat, and then helping us do the social science and communication of these results as well. So it takes a village to do this work, and here's just a little glimpse at what that looks like. You can go ahead then, Alex. And then here also just get a good sense of the geographic variety that we have in here too. And you saw some of that in Paul's video, but down at the bottom of the screen, the red shows all the project fields. The one down in the bottom is that Shore Place Ranch that's up above 8,000 feet, all the way down to projects that are on the river itself, and really trying to capture the variety of lands that we have in the upper Colorado headwaters, right? Because how water conservation impacts these different geographies is going to look a little different, and we want to be able to assess that. Go ahead, Alex. And then I think, again, just to kind of complement Paul's video here is just a bit more of what it looks like on the ground. All of our sites have these different research enclosures on high productivity and low productivity zones. And in each one, we're getting forage samples. And then you can see on the right, the soil moisture sensors. And those complement data we're getting from the eddy covariance tower in the bottom left. That's really, again, the Cadillac version of measuring water use at a very local environment. And that'll be paired with what Perry will talk about next. Our third way of looking at water use will be working with OpenET and using remote sensing. And so, again, just a bit of what this looks like on the ground. I want to pass it to Perry to give you a sneak peek of the results we're seeing so far. And it's a sneak peek because we'll be hopefully, working with Alex and others to host a longer webinar tentatively on June 22nd, where we'll really be able to dig into the nitty gritty of these results. And that'll pair with our first full report for the 2020 field season, that being the first year of the project. This year, we're moving into recovery, and we'll continue to evaluate recovery through 2023. But again, should have our first year's results to share with you all shortly. So thank you again for supporting this project, for your time, and I'll let Dr. Cabot take it from here.
Thanks a lot, Aaron. Alex, am I good to go?
You're good to go, Perry.
Am I good to go, Alex?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Sorry, I'm in a spotty connection area. Go ahead and advance to the next slide, Alex. And well, I guess that's moving forward. There we go. Hey, I just want to echo what everybody said. Thank you to the CWCB, the River District, and Alex for providing the funding to conduct what I think is one of the most exciting projects. I back up one, Alex. Really one of the most exciting projects I've been a part of since I've been at CSU. I will not impinge upon your ambitious schedule here, but I do need you to back up to there you go. This project is, of course, it's structured around remote sensing, which I think, folks have sort of, the trend has been people have become more familiar with this technology as it's become a little bit more mainstream. But as Aaron mentioned, our consumptive use evaluations are taking place literally from space as well as on the ground. And our goal is to utilize this, what we call an ensemble of different remote sensing models that to sort of break it down quite simply is they convert spectral image data, that being color and radiation and energy fluxes, which are measurable from space. They convert that data to actual consumptive use measurements. And by actual, I mean snapshot of consumptive use happening at the time of the
Hey, Perry, just making sure we didn't lose you there.
to evaluate consumptive use on the fields that we're studying. And so what you're looking at right there is one of the backup one, Alex. You're looking at the red splotchy picture is one of our fields that was dried up along with that little reference condition that's kind of looks like it's laying a dog laying down in the middle there, and then down on the south to the other their treatment field. And over on the side, this is where basically the sneak peek of the data is. These are the May through August 2016, 2019 inches of consumptive use happening on our different study fields. So one version of a reference is not just the year of the study, that being 2020, but also the historical ET for those fields. And so you can see that, we're in pretty good correspondence year to year we have some wet years and some dry years, but we've got a really good solid look back, which we can then compare the ET on the fields that were subjected to curtailment. And I tried to use kind of a little color scheme there to describe which fields were in curtailment and which were not. And so moving just quickly through I know you're on a tight time limit. You know, you're looking at somewhere between a 40 and a 60%, mid 50% reduction of consumptive use. So when you dry up those fields, you're essentially down to a bare baseline grassland, dry land ET rate. You throw on irrigation water, and you're jacking that amount up by 40 to 50%. So we've got some pretty good solid ideas on reductions at this point. And I like to say that the spatial expanse of a study this large, it begins to kind of obviate the concern around how valuable a single point of data might be. There's a comfort level, I think, in size when it comes to fields that are so large that they could possibly have heterogeneous ET rates across them. And so we're sort of capturing a lot of that study. Next slide, Alex. I'll just finish up with some forage evaluations that we've done. Again, I'll be available for questions later if anybody needs me to. But what you're looking at are the tall bars on these charts show the yield in kilograms per hectare on the fields that will continue to be irrigated, compared with little tiny axes there. You can see the R's are references and the T's are treatments, compared with the yields on the fields that were subjected to curtailment. And you don't need a scientist to tell you that if you don't irrigate grass, it's not going to grow. But the take-home message here is that we have obviously a pretty substantial reduction in yield, almost complete reduction, nothing noticeable except for trace clippings there on fields that were under curtailment. And as we begin to allow these fields to come back into production, that's where the irrigation, that's where the real interesting parts of this are going to come up. So you're going to look at these same slides for the next 3 years, where we're going to get to see how well those treatment fields catch up to their reference counterparts. And the reason why some of them look a little different than the others, because certain people bailed at different times, certain people grazed. We were able to capture the high and low production zones of each of these fields. And as they, particularly the fully irrigated ones, I'm optimistic to see some good data this year. We take the clippings every month just so we can track biomass recovery, and we will continue to do so through the remainder of the project in the upcoming years. I think that's all I've got, Alex. So full stop. We'll take questions if anybody has them.
Great. Thanks, Paul. And I guess I'll open it up back to the board to see if there are any questions for that. And of course, if this is our last virtual board meeting ever, of course, our last agenda item should have some technical difficulties. So with that, happy to take any questions from the board. And thanks again to these three guys for kind of coming today and giving an update on this really important project. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just first want to echo my thanks for the great presentation, and also to your willingness to take on this project so that we can all learn and benefit from your work. So thank you. And Director Schwartz, did you have a question?
I did, and thank you again for the presentation. And you sort of beat us to the punch, because I invited everybody to the roundtable meeting, which I assume will be a very similar presentation on Monday. But wondering, Perry, if you are utilizing data from any of your other projects, let's say the Gunnison project, or do you have any other information that you can be comparing from different environments, or is this the most extensive data and it'll be unique data in terms of your assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Director Schwartz. This project is certainly informed by the other work that we've done. The experimental designs and the support data that those projects have provided allowed this project to be a lot better. That being said, yes, we will. I would view it as a companion set of data points that we have from those other recovery pathway studies, and so this project allows us to have sort of a Grand County comparison with a Gunnison comparison. And I'm not sure if you're referring to forage recovery data or the consumptive use data, but the previous consumptive use evaluations, we did not do a lot of remote sensing. And so the big add to this project has been use of this remote sensing tool. But I have had some discussions with Aaron Wilson and Jesse Kruthopt advising them, and I think they're supportive of, they want to pursue this idea to look back at some of the fields that we subjected to curtailment for those other years, because we can do that now with all of this Open ET partnership. And so we could almost do like a quantum leap in terms of what we had, we had dried those fields up and we had sort of in-field sensors. We can do that work now with this partnership with Open ET and benefit from curtailment years where we didn't have those big scans. And then we would have, Gunnison ET data as well as Grand County ET data, and quite possibly, if anybody else knows anywhere else they dried anything up, we could go scan that as well.
Just a quick follow-up, and thank you. Unless will you be there on Monday at the roundtable or no?
I'm going to defer to Aaron and Paul to tell me where I'm going to be.
But just, I think this is such a fascinating comparison for looking at soils, ET, and then the nutrient composition of the forage or the crop. So comparing all those, at the end of the day, looking at these kinds of efficiencies and how they translate into production level, soil moisture. Is this something that we can use to inform as things get hotter, drier, and more stress on our agricultural production? What elements do you think are going to be the important takeaways?
Do you mean from this project?
Yeah. Yeah, from this project.
Oh, well, I think one of the, again, advantage of this project is that it allows us to have a scalable, translatable technology that we can use statewide that has an agreed upon accuracy level, has agreed upon methods, has been validated against conditions both dry and wet for fields like we've looked at, as well as fields like the Open ET partners have looked at. And so as these questions emerge around climate impacts or timing of irrigations, you have a way to make those comparisons statewide without having to, and fairly rapidly, without having to conduct, another study. I mean, I'm a researcher. Obviously, I love to study things, but, quite frankly, you like to be impactful as well. And so I love the idea of being able to take this modeling approach and, again, scalability, translatability, I think, to be nimble to our current challenges.
Thank you.
Dr. Hawkins?
Thanks, and just a great presentation. My question is, now that the project has been implemented, were there any surprises? And I'm thinking, I heard Paul say something about, a few logistical things that happened, but anything that came up, especially with unanticipated issues with return flows?
I don't think that's a question for me, Aaron. Paul?
I think that's a good one for Paul, if he can chime in.
Yeah, Director Hawkins. So the timing of today is fantastic. We are evaluating that. GC Win is actually out measuring water in all of the creeks associated with this project today, and also the main stem river system. So we really don't have anything to inform today, but we will be studying this again this year compared to last year based on the stream flow information and where that water really ended up. So it's a little bit of a buzzkill because we didn't have a baseline going into the dry up or the treatment fields. But now we'll be studying it for the next 3 years, looking into it. And like I said, timing is wonderful because they're doing it today.
Sounds good. Thank you. Any other questions for the team? All right. Well, thank you again, and look forward to hearing more as your evaluation continues. Before we wrap up, I'm going to turn it over to Director Mitchell for a very special presentation.
And I think we could probably formally close the meeting since this isn't an agenda item, and this is just our tribute to Linda. So you could probably do a first and second and motion to close, and then we can just go straight into our Linda love
for the encore. Got it. All right. Well, before I entertain the motion, I did just want to circle back on the conversation we had yesterday with regard to IBCC. I know we talked about a number of ideas about how IBCC and other interested and engaged stakeholders can continue to participate in the demand management feasibility investigation. And one thought I just want to throw out for consideration, I think IBCC could continue to play a really important role in this process in thinking about the framework related to proportionality and how we might go about achieving proportionality if we were to implement a demand management program. One thing that might be useful if the IBCC is willing to help us in this regard and take this on, it might be helpful if IBCC could put pen to paper in outlining some of the general principles on proportionality for this board to consider, perhaps at the November meeting, if that is doable, and if IBCC members are willing to assist us with that work. So I'll just throw that out there for the IBCC to consider, and for us to continue to think about how to utilize their talent and their perspectives that they bring to this important work. So thank you again to IBCC in particular for their many contributions to the demand management feasibility analysis so far, and look forward to continuing the conversation. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting. Dr. Schwartz.
So move, we adjourn our meeting.
And we just, okay. So it's been moved by Director Schwartz and seconded by Director Dutton that we adjourn. Thank you all again for a great meeting over the last 2 days. It's been great to see you, and look forward to seeing you all in person in the not too distant future. If anyone objects or wishes to abstain from our adjournment motion, please notify me in the chat. And seeing no objection, we are now adjourned. And I hope those of you who are able will stick around for our encore presentation. Thank you all.
Perfect. So we couldn't let Linda leave without a little